Hey my dear listener, before we start, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Comment down where are you from and what's your time right now. Let's jump into the video. Story 1. The Gong Farmer, Guardian of the Night Soil. You wake up in the middle of the night, but it isn't your own bed and this isn't your world. The air is thick, sour with rot and fire smoke. Somewhere a church bell tolls the hour 3, maybe 4. It's hard to tell when you live in the medieval city of London. There are no clocks, only the sound of time dragging its heels through dirt and dung. And dung is exactly why you're awake. You are a gong farmer, a cleaner of cesspits, a scooper of excrement, and perhaps the most invisible man in a society where people are valued by how well they avoid filth. Your job is to descend into the cesspits of privies, usually after dark, and clear them of their pungent contents. In the language of the time, what you remove is known as night soil, and it is your livelihood. The cesspit beneath. By the late medieval period, cities like London and York had begun to grow dense and vertical. Multi-story buildings leaned into the narrow streets like gossiping old women. At ground level or beneath it was your domain. Most homes, inns, and alehouses had cesspits. These were underground chambers dug into the earth, lined with clay or stone, designed to collect human waste. But medieval plumbing was medieval. There was no way to flush or drain the waste elsewhere. So when the pit filled, and it always did, someone had to remove it. That someone was you. The hours were nocturnal. Gong farmers worked at night not because of superstition, but because the stench was overwhelming, even by medieval standards. The streets would be emptier, the air colder, and the chance of complaints fewer. No one wanted to see the night soil carried through the alleyways in full daylight. There were laws against it, yet the people depended on you. Dressed in thick woolen garments soaked in lye, wearing gloves made of horsehide if you were lucky, you would carry with you a shovel, buckets, and a long pole used to stir the compacted waste. If the pit was shallow enough, you might squat and dig. If not, you descended into it. Imagine climbing into a confined space filled with weeks or months of human excrement, occasionally mixed with urine, kitchen waste, and sometimes the bodies of unwanted things: dead rats, stillborn infants, broken glass, spoiled meat. The heat alone in these pits was oppressive, and the lack of air was worse. The mix of methane and ammonia could easily knock a man unconscious. You worked quickly, filling bucket after bucket, hoisting them up to your partner above. The waste was then transported in covered carts or barrels to designated dumping grounds outside the city walls. These were known as lay stalls or dung hills. Sometimes, if permitted, the contents were sold as fertilizer to farmers. Night soil was, after all, the cheapest form of manure. A job of low esteem but high pay. It might surprise you to know that gong farmers were paid well, sometimes 3 to 4 times the average laborer's wage. That doesn't mean you were respected. Quite the opposite. People crossed themselves when they saw you. Children ran. At church, you were expected to sit near the back if you went at all. But coin was coin, and for many it was better than starving. For some, it even allowed upward mobility, though never into polite society. You were allowed to spend your money, but not expected to speak much. You might drink with other gong farmers at the end of a long shift, cursing the ones who left bones in their privies or threw iron nails into the pit. But outside of your circle, you were a ghost in plain sight. The law and the shovel. In 14th century London, strict ordinances governed your work. Cesspits had to be emptied regularly. If a pit overflowed, the home could be fined, but you, the gong farmer, could be prosecuted if caught dumping illegally. You had to haul the waste beyond the city, often in cold carts drawn by donkeys through winding, pitch-black lanes. If you spilled it on the way, there would be hell to pay. Literally. The fine could be enough to end your career. In some towns, such as York or Coventry, guilds of gong farmers eventually formed. They were rudimentary associations, informal unions, really, that allowed the workers to negotiate pay and assign territories. But the work never became honorable. A risky descent. Not every gong farmer lived long. Many succumbed to toxic gases in the pits, especially carbon dioxide and methane. There are records of multiple workers dying in the same cesspit on the same night, one after another descending to rescue the other, only to lose consciousness themselves. Rescues were rare. Corpses, not comrades, were often pulled out at sunrise. Other hazards included infections. Cuts from broken pottery or glass shards embedded in the waste could fester. There were no antibiotics, no antiseptics, only vinegar and prayer. Still, some men survived for decades. They developed resistance, perhaps even immunity to certain bacteria. They ate simple foods, drank strong ale, and avoided drawing attention. They were men of the shadows, working beneath the foundation of a civilization that both needed and rejected them. So you go to work night after night. The city sleeps and you descend. But tonight, something is different. The pit you're entering isn't like the others. The homeowner swore it hadn't been used in weeks, but already you feel the heat. The stink is stronger. There's movement, something shifting in the dark below. You lower the rope anyway and begin your descent. The rope strains in your gloved hands. Below you, the bucket dangles into the black, silent pit. You can't see the bottom, not really. The lantern casts light only a few feet down, swallowed almost immediately by the damp, heavy dark. You breathe through a linen cloth soaked in vinegar, a crude filter meant to dull the stench. It doesn't help much. Nothing ever does. You begin your descent. Tonight's pit is different. You felt it even before removing the stone slab that covers the opening. Most cesspits carry a thick scent of decay and waste, but this one has heat, a breath of warmth that rises like steam from a fevered wound. There's something too fresh about it. It hasn't been abandoned for weeks, no matter what the owner claimed. Still, you lower yourself in, because that's the job, and it always will be. The forgotten infrastructure. Medieval cities were not built with sanitation in mind. In fact, they barely accounted for people at all. London in the 14th century was a maze of overcrowded wooden buildings, leaning precariously into streets so narrow that you could extend your arms and touch both sides. Paved roads were rare, and sewers, where they existed, were nothing more than open trenches or shallow ditches running through alleys. People relieved themselves in chamber pots, which were then emptied into cesspits. In wealthier homes, privies were constructed over these pits, with seats made of stone or heavy wood. The poor, they squatted over holes dug in yards or defecated in ditches. The worst off simply dumped their waste into the street, sometimes yelling the traditional warning, "Garde-l'eau," a bastardization of the French garde-l'eau, or watch out for the water. The city stank constantly. In summer, the heat turned it rancid. In winter, frozen waste blocked trenches. But beneath it all, a hidden world of cesspits slowly filled, quiet, deadly, ignored. It was your world, a city beneath the city. Daily life of a gong farmer. You sleep during the day, often in a shack near the lay stall, the dung hill where you dispose of the night's soil. The place is teeming with flies, and the earth is dark and wet year-round. Your clothes are crusted with filth. You wash when you can, typically in a stream downstream from where others collect their water. The irony is not lost on you. Food is simple. Stews made of root vegetables, stale bread soaked in ale, and occasionally meat, if the rats haven't gotten to it first. You drink heavily not because you enjoy it, but because it dulls the senses. The ale is weak but constant, safer than water. Gong farmers form a loose fraternity. You pass one another in the night, nodding silently, each pushing your cart of sealed buckets through streets lined with sleeping souls. You know one another by scent, if not always by name. There's Elias, who hums hymns as he digs. Margaret, the only woman among you, who once knocked a man out with a bucket for calling her a witch. And little Bram, who fell into a pit once and came out with a broken leg and a story he's told every week since. Together, you serve a city that pretends not to see you. Official recognition and strange privileges. By the 1500s, the job of gong farmer began to receive more formal recognition in certain parts of England. In some towns, cesspit cleaners were granted licenses, required to follow specific regulations. In cities like London and York, laws prohibited transporting night soil during daylight hours. Violators faced steep fines or worse. Yet with regulation came a peculiar sort of prestige. Gong farmers were paid well for the time. The job came with allowances like the right to keep any valuables found in the muck, coins dropped in privies, discarded jewelry, even the occasional lost dagger were yours by right. There are tales, perhaps exaggerated, of gong farmers discovering silver goblets or even small fortunes in waste pits. Enough, sometimes, to start a new life. But few ever left. Why? Because even if you had coin, you didn't have cleanliness. The stink followed you. It clung to your skin, soaked into your nails, hid in the folds of your boots. No amount of bathing could remove it. You were marked. Even in death, gong farmers were sometimes buried in unconsecrated ground or their graves left unmarked. The job might have paid silver, but it cost everything else. A turning point below. Your foot splashes down. The pit is deeper than expected, nearly up to your thighs. You steady yourself, one hand on the wall, and raise the lantern. A dull glimmer flickers in the muck. At first you think it's just moisture, but then you see it again, something metallic. You lean in, holding the light low. It's a ring, gold, set with a small black stone, oddly clean for where it lies. You fish it out, wipe it on your coat. It glints strangely in the lamplight. There are etchings on the band, not Latin, not English, symbols wavy, runic, old. You hear a sound behind you. Not from above, not from the street. From beneath. It's faint, a sloshing shift, like something dragging itself through the waste toward you. You freeze, straining to listen. Nothing now, only your breathing and the slow drip of water from somewhere deeper in the pit. You pocket the ring. You've seen worse, dead animals' bones, once a skull. You get back to work. Health, disease, and the irony of survival. It might strike you as curious that gong farmers were not especially prone to plague during the Black Death or later outbreaks. In fact, they often lived longer than others in the same districts. Some believe constant exposure to pathogens gave them a form of resistance. Others say it was simply that they lived apart on the fringes of society, rarely in crowds, seldom in churches or markets. Still, diseases lurked. Not just the plague, but typhoid, cholera, dysentery, and infections from cuts that festered for weeks. There were no doctors for men like you, only folk healers and wives with poultices. But there was one disease that worried gong farmers above all: the mists. So named for the dizziness and vomiting that came from breathing the gases too deeply, especially in enclosed pits. A man caught by the mists might never wake up again. You've known men who collapsed mid-shovel, their faces blue, their mouths open, gone in seconds. Tonight the air is still, but the ring itches in your pocket. And as you dig, you uncover something else. Not gold, not a bone. A brick wall, oddly smooth, built at a slant, as though sealing something off. Why would someone construct a wall inside a cesspit? You scrape at the mortar, unsure. You feel something behind it, empty space, a cavity, maybe another shaft, maybe a chamber sealed long ago. The thought lingers as you haul another bucket to the surface. A world that needed you even as it denied you. As dawn approaches, the streets begin to stir. Vendors wheel carts toward market. The baker fires his kiln. The bell at St. Mary Woolchurch rings softly in the fog. You slink back toward your shack, cart now empty. Another pit cleared, another job done. No one greets you. A woman passes with her child and turns her face away. The cobbler across the lane glares as you walk past. You try to ignore them. Because tomorrow night, another house will call. Another pit will overflow. And no matter what they think of you, they'll need you. But the ring is still in your pocket. And the wall shouldn't be there. The ring is warm in your palm. It has stayed with you through the day, hidden beneath your bedding of straw and sackcloth, tucked under your pillow while the sun crawled across the sky. You did not sleep well. Gong farmers rarely do, but this was different. There was a strange tightness behind your eyes, a pressure like a storm gathering in your skull. Not illness exactly, just presence. You told no one. The wall in the cesspit was real. Not a trick of light, not a collapsed foundation or accidental debris. It had smooth bricks Roman, maybe sealed carefully with mortar. Someone had built it deliberately, and someone had sealed something behind it, in the pit of filth and rot. Why? That question hangs over you now, like the stench of your trade that never truly washes off. It presses down on your lungs as the sky dims and the next night begins. You're going back. Not because you have to. Because you need to know. Beyond the job. It's not typical behavior for a Gong farmer to revisit a cleared pit. Once the buckets are full and the sludge dumped in the lay stall, the work is over. The next privy, the next client, the next night, these are what demand your attention. But not tonight. Tonight you carry with you more than a shovel and lantern. You've brought a chisel, a mallet, and a length of rope that once held barrels together. You're ready to dig, but not for excrement. For secrets. The hidden chambers of the past. There are layers beneath every city, but medieval London was a city built upon itself. As Roman Londinium fell to time, Saxon and Norman builders simply raised new walls on top of old. Foundations overlapped, crumbled, were repurposed. This meant that strange discoveries were not unheard of. Some privies dipped into ancient cellars. Others intersected with abandoned wine vaults, forgotten plague burials, or collapsed tunnels once used by monks or smugglers. But a constructed wall, hidden inside a functioning cesspit, that was something else. You arrive just before midnight. The street is quiet, the owners of the house long asleep. The slab covering the pit still sits askew from your previous work. No one has touched it. You lift it and descend again. The smell is worse now. Stirred, perhaps, agitated. The pit is shallower, you've cleared most of it, but enough remains to coat your boots and knees as you settle in. The ring still in your coat pocket pulses with a curious warmth. You set the lantern beside the wall and begin to chisel. Of seals and fears. The wall comes apart more easily than expected. The mortar is brittle. Within minutes, you've pried away 3 bricks, then 6. A gap opens. The air that escapes is cold. Not like the pit's decay, but truly cold, as if from a deeper place. The flame of your lantern flickers. You pause. Beyond the hole, there is darkness. And then stone, flat, cut stone. A tiled floor just beyond the breach. Your light catches a faint curve of metal, something lying flat in the chamber beyond. You push your head through. It is a room. Small but real, a cellar of sorts. The floor is dry. The walls are lined with niches, some filled with ceramic jars, others empty. One niche holds a decayed bundle of cloth, another bones, human. You step inside. This is not a plague burial. This is something older. You light a second taper and explore, careful not to disturb too much. One jar contains coins Roman by the look. Another, dried herbs that crumble into dust at your touch. Symbols are etched on the walls, faded, circular, almost Celtic in form. And in the center, a metal plate flat with a symbol embossed in relief, the same symbol on the ring. You place the ring on it. There is no sound, no light, but something shifts inside you, like a key turning in a lock you didn't know was there. And for a moment, you remember your name. Not your common name, the old one. The one you were given before you began to shovel waste in the dark. Then it's gone again. The superstitions and the realities. Gong farmers were men and women bound to the mundane, but they lived closer to the forgotten and forbidden than most. They saw the bones others buried, the charms thrown away, the discarded tokens of childbirth, sickness, death. Many carried protective amulets or stitched symbols into their coats, charms against the mists, against spirits that whispered from drains. Was it all superstition? Possibly. But the medieval mind did not draw the line between waste and mystery so cleanly. What lay in the cesspit was not merely matter. It was memory, secrecy, confession. You think about this now as you return through the hole, back into the waste, back into the world of carts and buckets. You reseal the bricks loosely. No one will find what you found, not unless they're looking. You don't take the coins, you leave the jars. You take only the ring. A life that endures. The next night you answer another call. A new house, a new pit, more waste. You work as you always have, quietly, efficiently. Elias asks if you've been sleeping poorly. You lie and say it's the cold. But something has shifted. You walk with a straighter spine now, not prouder exactly, but aware, as though the filth around you is only surface, a crust atop something deeper, older, and not entirely forgotten. Days pass, then weeks. You return to the hidden chamber only once more. It is unchanged. The ring no longer burns in your pocket. It has gone cold. But you wear it now, sewn into your glove, a hidden circle of gold pressed against your palm with every dig. What it unlocked in you, you can't quite say. But you've never feared the dark since. The echo of the unsung. The story of the gong farmer is not taught in schools. Children do not reenact it in plays. No ballads are sung for those who shouldered the waste of civilization. But they lived, and they mattered. They cleared the filth so the city might breathe. They endured the scorn so the streets could walk unsoiled. They died in silence, yet they left behind the clean foundations upon which others built cathedrals, markets, and memory. You were one of them. And somewhere beneath layers of earth and time, a ring still waits in the dark, waiting to be found. Reflection. The gong farmer's tale is not one of triumph, but of necessity. In a world without sanitation, they performed the most crucial and most reviled task. Their work prevented outbreaks. Their labor allowed cities to grow. Though history forgot their names, the streets they cleaned became the veins of civilization. And it is perhaps in the dirtiest corners of history that we find the deepest truths about human endurance, resilience, and the quiet power of the unseen. Story 2, Leech Collector, Wadding for Blood. You wade into the still, muddy water before sunrise. Your feet sink into the silt with each step, cold mud sucking at your ankles, hiding stones and broken twigs below the surface. It's early spring, but the chill still clings to the air like damp wool. The only sound is the slow ripple of your movement and the far-off croak of frogs waking in the reeds. You stand still, and you wait. Because today, like every day, you are the bait. An occupation of patience. You are a leech collector. Your body is your tool and your blood your payment. You earn your living by standing in stagnant marshes, lakes, and bogs, allowing hungry leeches to attach themselves to your skin. Once full of blood, they are plucked off and stored carefully for sale, bound for doctors, barbers, and apothecaries who will use them to balance the humors of the sick and the noble alike. It is, in theory, a simple trade. In practice, it is anything but. Leeches are delicate creatures. They thrive in shallow, unmoving water with soft vegetation, often the same waters that breed fever, dysentery, and rot. You enter these waters at dawn because it is the calmest time, and because that's when the leeches are most active. You stand very still. The trick is to keep your heart calm. Too much movement and they shy away. Too little blood flow and they don't feed. You need to become part of the landscape, a warm, silent thing. And then you feel the first one latch on. It's barely noticeable at first, just a tingle on your shin. Then another, higher up. then 3, 5, 7, until it feels like your legs are wrapped in soft thread. You do not flinch. You wait. A surge in demand. In medieval and early modern Europe, bloodletting was a cornerstone of medicine. Rooted in the ancient Greek theory of the four humors blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, medical practitioners believed that illness resulted from imbalance. Too much blood, remove it. Too much black bile, induce vomiting. And when knives weren't ideal or the patient was highborn and preferred a gentler method, leeches were the solution. By the 13th century, leeches were sold in markets across Europe. They were kept in earthen jars or wooden boxes, often wrapped in moss or water-soaked cloth. Apothecaries stored them in cool rooms. Physicians prized them. In England and Wales, marshlands like those in Somerset, Norfolk, and Lincolnshire became the collection sites of choice. Locals, usually women, children, or the elderly, were employed to gather them. It was among the lowest paid, most physically taxing jobs available. But in times of high demand, such as during plague outbreaks or widespread fevers, the price of leeches could spike. And so, people returned to the waters again and again. A woman's trade. Though men did collect leeches, the task often fell to women, particularly in rural and impoverished areas. It was considered too degrading for skilled tradesmen, yet too vital to ignore. Collectors had no guild, no protection, and no fixed wage. You were paid by the leech. One woman might collect several dozen in a single morning if the marsh was fresh and her blood strong. But there were risks. Leeches were not clean. Repeated feeding on human blood left them carriers of infection, and the wounds they left could become inflamed or infected themselves, particularly if bits of their jaws remained embedded in the skin. But that was not the worst of it. The worst came when you returned to the same waters too many times. The leeches remembered. Bleeding for a living. After an hour in the marsh, your legs are streaked with blood. You pluck the engorged leeches from your skin, one by one, using a thin stick or the edge of a fingernail. The oldest trick is salt, but that kills them, and you're paid for live leeches. So you endure the sensation. They resist removal, clinging tight with their tiny rows of teeth, twisting slightly as you peel them off. Some have already detached, falling lazily into your pail, bellies swollen and dark. You count them. 22. Not bad, but not good enough. You go back in. Medical use and misuse. Leeches were used for everything from toothaches to tumors. Doctors applied them to the temples for headaches, to the chest for pneumonia, to the neck for fevers. Some women were leeched to cure menstrual disorders. Children were leeched for teething pains. Even emotional disturbances like melancholy or hysteria could be treated this way. The number of leeches used per patient varied. A mild case might use 2 or 3. A severe one could involve dozens. Royal households and noble courts stocked thousands. In 1825, centuries after your own time, France imported over 30 million leeches for medical use. The trade had only grown. But in your world, long before that medical craze, you're part of the groundwork. You don't know where the leeches go, only that they are bought, packed in damp moss, and shipped by cart to market towns and cities. Only that someone somewhere is paying more than you are being paid. And still you go back in. Because what else is there? Infection and resistance. Your legs never fully heal. The wounds from feeding sites are small, but they bleed for hours. Leeches secrete hirudin, an anticoagulant, which ensures the blood keeps flowing long after they detach. This is what makes them medically useful. But for you, it means your skin is dotted with oozing, open sores, slow to scab and easy to infect. Some collectors developed a kind of resistance, a hardened immune system, stronger than others, even as their skin remained raw and sore. They rarely bathed, not from sloth but to preserve what little healing their skin had managed. Salt water stung, so did scrubbing. Others weren't so lucky. There were stories of leeches that burrowed particularly aggressive species that didn't stop at the surface. These tales were likely exaggerated, but not entirely false. Certain types of leeches could enter soft tissue or mucous membranes, the mouth, the nose, even the eyes. Collectors learned to breathe shallowly when stooping low, to keep their mouths closed in the fog. Market day in a kind of pride. You finish your day with 43 leeches. They writhe in the bottom of a damp bag, a slow, undulating movement that barely disturbs the air. You feel lightheaded common after losing blood, but the ache is familiar now. It doesn't bother you much. You walk to the nearest village market. Your bag is weighed, the leeches counted. You are paid with coin and a nod and no eye contact. You are not respected, but you are needed. And that is something. The collector's longevity. Most leech collectors did not live long lives. Exposure to the elements, repeated blood loss, and waterborne disease took their toll. But some survived well into old age, becoming minor legends in their villages. They were never wealthy, never welcomed at the manor, but they were known. And sometimes knowing mattered more. You think of that as you sit by your small fire, dressing your legs with moss and cloth. The bite marks are red and soft-edged. You've learned to recognize the dangerous ones. Tonight, you'll sleep with your feet elevated. Tomorrow, you'll return to the marsh. Because that is your world. And beneath the still water, something waits. The fire is dying, and your legs throb beneath the blanket. You've wrapped them tight with linen scraps soaked in sour ale, a poor man's disinfectant. The bleeding has mostly stopped, but you know it will resume in the morning. Leeches leave wounds that seem minor, but refuse to heal properly. Tiny, red-ringed mouths that itch, weep, and sometimes blacken if you're careless. You chew a piece of stale bread, sip weak ale, and think about how the wealthiest people in the land, lords, physicians, monks, are draining blood from others while yours flows freely in a bog, to the tune of a few pence per sack. You are not part of the cure. You are part of the supply. Humoral theory, the bleeding philosophy. To understand why people like you spend hours feeding leeches with your own blood, you must look at the foundation of medieval medicine. Everything comes back to the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. A concept inherited from Hippocrates and Galen. Humoral theory dominated European medicine well into the 17th century. The balance of these fluids was believed to govern both physical health and temperament. Too much blood, you were sanguine, cheerful, ruddy, and possibly feverish. Too much black bile, melancholic, prone to sadness. Too much yellow bile, choleric, quick to anger. Too much phlegm, phlegmatic, slow and sluggish. The prescription for imbalance, often removal. And thus, the practice of bloodletting flourished. Knife versus leech. Barber surgeons often performed bloodletting with knives or lancets, opening a vein and allowing blood to flow into a bowl. It was messy, risky, and painful, but fast. Leeches, on the other hand, were used for more delicate situations. Women, children, the elderly, nobles who feared pain. Leeches could be applied to precise spots, behind the ears, on the temples, at the base of the spine. Their bites were gentler, their feeding slower, and their effect, according to medieval thought, subtler, ideal for balancing rather than purging. A skilled physician might specify the number of leeches, their placement, and the duration. Some even kept leech journals, recording how each patient responded to specific regimens. In this strange world of theory and trial, you, the leech collector, stand at the muddy crossroads of nature and medicine. You don't understand the theory. You don't need to. You just bleed. The collector's toolkit. Your equipment is simple and mostly internal. A calm body, panicked movement frightens leeches. Tolerant skin, scarred, rough, but still warm enough to attract. A good eye to spot leeches in muddy water and remove them without killing them. A trained touch, too much pressure when peeling them off and they rupture, useless, too little and they reattach. For storage, you use a moss-lined bucket or jar, dampened with marsh water. Leeches must be kept moist or they die. You also need ventilation, so the container is covered with cloth, not a sealed lid. Collectors often kept their own leeches for a time, letting them rest between feedings. A well-fed leech can go months without eating, but some collectors claimed their leeches forgot how to bite if left too long. Others swore by specific ponds or lakes, leeching holes, where the creatures grew larger, darker, and hungrier. The best collectors guarded these locations like treasure. You found two such places, though one is drying up now. The dangers of the trade. There's the obvious: blood loss, infection, and disease. But leech collectors faced more than just physical harm. In rural areas, where medicine and superstition blurred, the sight of a person covered in wriggling creatures was disturbing. Children screamed. Priests muttered warnings. You were seen as unclean, perhaps even cursed. Some believed leech collectors brought disease not merely through the water, but through intention. Your work made you an outsider. You were not welcome at the village well. You were not invited to church festivals. You were not trusted. And yet, every week, the apothecary came looking for your sack of leeches. Economics of bleeding. In times of plague or epidemic, leech prices could double. Physicians, often too respectable to wade into a marsh themselves, sent agents or purchased from middlemen who'd already underpaid someone like you. But in rare instances, you might deal directly with a doctor. There were stories of collectors who gained exclusive contracts, a steady income, even housing, in exchange for guaranteed supply. These were rare and often fabricated. Most collectors lived in huts on the edge of wetlands or shared space with laborers and shepherds. A good week might bring a few shillings, enough to eat, perhaps to buy shoes. But you could never save, because there was no end to the demand for blood. Export and empire. By the late medieval period and into the Renaissance, leeches became a commodity. In some towns, collectors worked in informal groups, harvesting hundreds of leeches a week. These were sold in bulk to traders who moved them across Europe. England, France, Germany all participated in the leech trade. Collectors in the British Isles found particular value in Hirudo medicinalis, the European medicinal leech. Dark, striped, and reliable, prized for their strong bite and slow digestion. So well regarded, in fact, that demand began to outstrip supply. By the 1700s, entire wetlands would be stripped of leeches, populations collapsing under the pressure of collection. But in your time, the leeches still come. And so do you. A memory from the water. You remember a time not long ago when you brought your younger brother into the marsh. He had begged to help, to earn coin, to be useful. He was 10. He stood beside you, trembling as the first leech latched on. He tried to hide his fear, but his legs shook. You told him to hold still. He didn't. And the leeches fled. Only one attached. He wept that night, ashamed. You gave him your supper, and the next morning he never returned to the marsh. He became a porter, moved to town, married. But you stayed. Because someone has to. A glimpse of the noble world. Once a physician came to your village, a tall man in a cloak, with clean boots and fine gloves. He carried a leather satchel and a dozen tiny glass jars. He bought your leeches 40 for a good price and asked questions, not about you, but about the marsh, about the size of the leeches, the depth of the water. You answered plainly. Then he asked if he could follow you to observe. You said no, because the marsh is not a place for people like him. It is not meant to be observed. It is meant to be endured. Tomorrow the marsh. You'll return before dawn. The water will be colder, the leeches slower, but you'll wait still as stone until they come. Because this is what you know. Because your blood is the one thing of value you can give, over and over again. And because beneath the mud and reeds and muck, the leeches are waiting. Hungry. The marsh doesn't care if you're tired. It doesn't pause because your legs ache or your stomach is empty or because the leeches have left you with more open wounds than skin. It waits always. A still, gray world of fog and slow water, thick with the scent of decay and growth. And you return again because this is your life. You are a leech collector. And there is no retirement. The body as landscape. Your body tells the story. Years of standing in the marsh have bent your spine, thickened your ankles, and turned your feet into pale leather. Your hands are nimble but always cold. Your breath wheezes now when you walk uphill. The older collectors say the marsh gets inside you in your joints, your blood, your dreams. You used to feel the cold. Now not as much. You think this is a kind of blessing, though you wonder if it's just numbness. Your legs are dotted with old scars, the pinkish, pitted marks where the skin never fully healed. Some look like bites, others like burns. A physician once offered to leech one of them to rebalance the skin. You declined. You are already bled enough. A decline in the waters. There are fewer leeches now. Whether it's the cold season or something else, you're not sure. Some say it's over-harvesting. Others believe the water has changed too acidic, too warm, too churned by the new sheep pastures uphill. You remember a time when 1 hour in the shallows could fill your sack. Now it takes 3. And sometimes you leave with fewer than a dozen skin covered in bites but no reward. Still you go back. Not out of pride. Out of necessity. The collector's isolation. You've become part of the marsh now. Villagers no longer call you by name. They refer to you as the leech woman or the bog man, depending on the day. Children peek at you behind fences, whispering stories their parents told them that your blood is poisoned or that you grow new skin every spring. You've been alone for years now. You're not sure when it happened, when the last person left your table, when the last voice called you neighbor. Maybe it was gradual, maybe it was the smell, or maybe they saw in you a reflection of what they feared most, a body bled dry by labor, left behind by the world. Even the doctor stopped coming. He was kind enough in his own way, paid fairly, asked questions. Then one winter he didn't return. You heard later he died of a fever. They tried to bleed him with knives, not leeches. You thought of saying something. But you didn't. The healing myth. For centuries, leeches held a dual identity, both feared and revered. To peasants, they were creatures of the mire, symbols of sickness, filth, and rot. To physicians, they were living instruments of healing. To the church, they were ambiguous part of God's creation, yet feeding on blood. You live between these truths. You've seen noblemen pay a silver coin for a single fat leech. You've also seen them recoil in disgust when they hear what you do for a living. They do not want to be reminded where the leeches come from. They prefer the jars, the glass, the illusion of cleanliness. You wonder how many people you've helped save. You wonder how many were bled too much. But mostly, you just wonder when the last time was that someone asked your name. A night in the fog. One evening, a boy follows you into the marsh. You see him from the corner of your eye, maybe 10 or 12, with 2 clean boots and a scarf wrapped too tight. He stands at the edge, watching. You ignore him. But when you leave the water, bleeding slightly, sack in hand, he's still there. You really do it, he asks. You nod. You let them bite you. You show him your leg red, oozing, dotted with the dark, glistening shapes of leeches writhing gently in your skin. He turns green and runs. You smile. A little. The unchanging way. The tools haven't changed. The water hasn't changed, not really. You still collect the moss, still wrap your sack in damp cloth, still count them, weigh them, and sell them in town when you can. But there are fewer buyers now. A new barber has arrived from the city. He uses blades, says he doesn't trust creatures, claims leeches are old medicine, that science has moved on, that infection comes from filth, not imbalance. You say nothing. You know how many people he's buried already. Still fewer leeches sell now, and the marsh gives less. But you go back. The collector's ending. You wonder what will happen when you are gone. There are no apprentices, no daughter to take over, no one to learn where the water is deepest, where the leeches feed best, where to stand without sinking. The village may forget, but the marsh won't. It remembers your footsteps, your blood, your heat. The leeches that fed on you once multiplied. You've left something of yourself in those waters. Perhaps that's enough. A final reflection. The leech collector is a forgotten profession. It was never grand, never celebrated, but it was real. It existed at the crossroads of science and superstition, biology and labor, medicine and myth. Collectors like you stood in the same place, day after day, year after year, bleeding so that others might be healed or at least believed they were. You were part of an ecosystem larger than yourself. You gave without knowing who would receive. You survived in the margins. And though your name may not be remembered, your work fed the bloodstream of history quietly, steadily, until the very end. Story 3, Fuller, the urine-stomping cloth worker. You start your day by stepping into a vat of cold, human urine. It's not just your job, it's your whole world. You are a fuller and essential, if invisible, figure in medieval textile production. When people speak of the fine wools of England or the luxury cloths traded across Europe, they don't mention you. They remember the weavers, the merchants, the noblewomen draped in finished gowns, but not the person who stomped the cloth clean. Yet without you, none of it would be possible. Because wool straight from the loom is filthy, oily, greasy, loose, and before it can be dyed, worn, or sold, it must be cleaned, shrunk, and strengthened. That's your job. And the cleaning agent. Urine. A job with a history. Fulling has ancient roots. The process can be traced back to Roman times and even earlier. At its core, fulling is a form of felting using moisture, heat, and agitation to bind wool fibers together. It makes the cloth denser, stronger, and more water-resistant. In the Middle Ages, particularly in England, wool was a backbone of the economy. It was the jewel in the realm's crown. Lords grew rich off sheep. Kings levied taxes on every sack. Towns were founded and flourished on the backs of sheep and those who processed their fleece. But before wool could clothe a merchant or pad a knight's gambeson, it had to be cleaned of its natural oils, chiefly lanolin, a waxy substance that protects sheep from the elements but makes cloth slippery, smelly, and hard to dye. And so fulling. And so you. The process step by step. You work in a small shed, open at the sides, with stone tubs sunk into the floor. These tubs are filled with chamber lye, a polite term for stale human urine, collected from households, taverns, and alleyways in large clay jugs. Urine is a surprisingly effective cleanser. It contains ammonia, a natural degreaser that breaks down lanolin and allows the fibers to bind. Into the tub goes the unfinished cloth, large, loose pieces, sometimes as wide as doorways, sometimes no more than scarf length. Once submerged, it's your turn. You roll up your trousers, you climb in, and then for hours you stomp. Barefoot. Up and down, side to side, turning the cloth, agitating it with your toes and heels, pressing the fabric into itself, encouraging the fibers to tighten. It is slow work, rhythmic, grueling. The smell overwhelming at first. But eventually, you stop noticing. The fuller's field. In larger towns, fulling was too large a task for one man or one tub. There were fulling mills, powered by water wheels, with large hammers that pounded the cloth mechanically. But these were expensive, rare, and mostly used in areas with swift rivers and wealthy guilds. In most places, rural towns, village outskirts, the job was still done by foot and tub, often in open-air spaces called fuller's fields. These fields smelled foul and were avoided by anyone not involved in the trade, yet they were vital. You might share the field with other fullers, each stomping their own cloth, each immersed in their own pungent bath. You would speak little, too tired, too focused. The sound of feet slapping wet wool and the dull splash of movement were the background music of your trade. Working with waste. You're not squeamish, you can't afford to be. Every few days, someone arrives to replenish the vats. Usually a boy, sometimes a woman with a handcart. They bring fresh urine, often collected from alehouses, where drinkers have relieved themselves in communal pots. In some towns, fullers even paid households for their urine, or received it as part of a tax-in-kind system. The trick is to let it go stale ferment for a few days, until the ammonia concentration peaks. Then and only then does it have the potency you need. Sometimes you heat the mixture slightly with stones from a nearby fire pit to aid the reaction. In winter, the cold slows the process and makes the stomping harder. But the work continues. Always. Physical toll. Your legs are constantly soaked. Even after you leave the vat, the cloth must be lifted, wrung, and moved to the rinsing area. You carry heavy loads of wet wool on your shoulders, trailing drops of urine behind you. Your skin cracks from the exposure. Your knees ache. Your back stiffens with each load. Your feet, callous, pale, often infected. You know fullers who have lost toes to rot. You wash when you can, usually at the river, downstream from the mill, but it's never enough. The smell clings to your skin, your clothes, your home. People know what you do before you speak. And yet the job is respected, if not admired. Because it is essential. Because no one wants to wear greasy cloth. Cloth for kings. You think about this sometimes as you stomp. The wool you're working today, it will travel. Maybe not far, but far enough. It might be dyed deep blue or red or golden yellow, then trimmed and sold in the market. A merchant might line his cloak with it. A priest might wear it as part of his vestments. A knight might sleep under it during campaign. You will never meet them. They will never know your name. But they will touch what you have cleaned, pressed, and shrunk with your feet. Your sweat, your patience, your smell. And so in a strange way, you are everywhere. A fuller's guild for some. In larger towns, fullers formed guilds. These associations regulated wages, enforced standards, and negotiated with local authorities. Being part of a guild meant protection. You could not be undercut, overworked, or dismissed without cause. But guilds required fees, and entry was not automatic. Many fullers, especially rural ones like you, remained independent, hired by local weavers or dyers, paid by the bolt or by the week. You've considered moving to a guild town, but the cost of living is higher, and the work is often more specialized, less stomping, more overseeing. You prefer the stomping. It makes sense. Toward the rinse. After hours of labor, the cloth is ready to be rinsed. You lift it carefully, muscles trembling. It weighs more than it looks. Wet wool holds water like a sponge. You drag it to the rinsing trough, fresh water this time, clean from a stream diverted for the purpose. The cold shocks your arms. You dunk the wool, working out the last of the ammonia, the last of the grease. The cloth is no longer limp and pale. It is tight, almost springy to the touch. It smells like wet sheep, not urine. It is ready. Not finished, but one step closer. As you leave, you wring out your trousers, your legs ache. Your toes are raw, but the cloth is cleaned and your task is done. For today, tomorrow there will be more. More wool, more urine, more silence. More stomping in a field no one visits. But you'll return, because someone must walk the dirty road before others walk the fine one. The cloth you just stomped is hanging now, limp but clean, over a wooden pole in the drying yard. Your legs are aching, your knees burn from the hours spent in cold, sharp liquid. The sun cuts low through the gray sky, but you have one more batch to begin before night. You glance at the bundle of freshly loomed wool by the door coarse, greasy, yellowed with lanolin. It's a long bolt, and it'll be dark before you're halfway through. But wool waits for no one. The social thread. You are a fuller, and your place in the town's life is strange. You are essential, yet unwelcome. No feast is complete without fine cloth. No church altar is dressed without bright-dyed linens. No noble's doublet, no merchant's cloak, no peasant's cap exists without your hands first touching it. And yet when you walk past the baker's stall, they glance away. The smell follows you, even on your best days. It seeps into your skin, your hair, your breath. Children call you foot stink when their parents aren't listening. Even the tanner's boy who works with flayed hides wrinkles his nose when you pass. You might laugh, but you don't. Not anymore. The wool trade, a national obsession. You remind yourself why you do it. Wool is power. In 13th and 14th century England, wool wasn't just an export, it was the foundation of the kingdom's economy. Castles, roads, monasteries, they were funded by the taxation of wool. The crown levied duties on every sack exported to Flanders, Italy, and beyond. You've heard tell of men who made their fortunes in wool lords with 1,000 sheep, merchants who married their daughters into nobility. But they never mention the fullers, because your part is never glamorous. Your part is never even clean. And yet without fulling, wool is nothing but greasy fluff. Guilds and the gatekeepers. In nearby towns, fullers belong to guilds. You've seen them in their fine woolen coats, iron badges pinned to their breast. The guild provides protection, pay standards, and even apprentices. But guilds come with cost coin, loyalty, politics, and you've never had enough of the first to bother with the others. Besides, the guilds frown on rural fullers. You work on the outskirts, on the margins, where rent is cheap and the vats can be dug into the soil without permission. Still, you sometimes imagine it. A shop of your own, an apprentice to do the stomping, a roof that doesn't leak. You even know what you'd name it. The golden tread. A play on words, tread for your feet, golden for the cloth once it's ready for dye. But that's a dream. And dreams are soft. Your work is not. The fulling mallets. You heard once about a water-powered fulling mill upriver. In that place, wool is pounded not by human feet, but by great wooden hammers called stocks or fulling beetles, lifted and dropped by the rotation of a wheel. Efficient, yes, but loud, mechanized, dangerous. And the work there, overseers' quotas, fines. Here you have freedom of a kind. You choose when to work, when to eat, when to pause and simply rest your legs in the sun, cloth over your shoulder, the wind drying your skin. It's a hard freedom, but it's yours. Health and hidden hazards. You've grown used to the ache in your joints, but you know it's not normal. Some days your knees lock. Other days your toes split open from prolonged soaking. The constant contact with ammonia has hardened your soles, but also left them cracked and infected. You've known fullers who went blind from vapors in enclosed stalls. Others developed lingering coughs from inhaling the dust that clings to freshly carded wool. One man, Thomas, from the next village, slipped on wet stone and drowned in his own vat. No one came to his funeral. The priest claimed he stank too much for church burial. That stuck with you. Even now. A day's interruption. Today, someone approaches your field. You're surprised. Most people avoid your end of the village. The air alone is enough to keep them away. But here comes a man in a pale green cloak, boots polished, his belt clasped in polished brass. He doesn't speak at first. Then he asks if he can buy a bolt of finished cloth. You nearly laugh. What would you be doing with finished cloth? You clean it, shrink it, strengthen it. You don't dye it. You don't tailor it. You point him toward the weaver's lane. But before he goes, he says something strange. They say the best fulling comes from this yard, from your feet. You don't know how to answer. He thanks you and leaves. You don't believe him. But it stays with you. Tools of the trade. Your tools are few but trusted. The vat, dug deep and lined with stone or clay, large enough to hold yards of cloth, small enough to warm with fire-heated rocks. The fuller's stick, for prodding and turning heavy cloth without risking your back. The drying poles, smooth ash beams, sun-bleached and bowed with use. Your feet calloused, cracked and unshod, the truest tool of all. You own no dye, no combs, no shears. But your tub has seen cloth for noblemen and soldiers alike. And your steps have shaped every fold. A moment of rest. As dusk settles, you step out of the vat. Your legs are streaked with pale pink lines, the residue of ammonia and effort. You wash them in a basin of cool water. It stings. It always does. But you enjoy the silence that follows. The wind hums through the linen hung to dry. Birds roost in the hedges. For a few minutes, it is almost beautiful. You close your eyes. The dreams come again. The golden tread, your shop, your name painted over the lintel, a sign with a foot and a bolt of cloth, the stink replaced with the scent of soap and dye. Then a shout from the alley breaks it. A cart stuck in the mud. You open your eyes. Back to work. Looking ahead. You know fulling will change. Already talk spreads of more mills being built. The towns want efficiency. They want speed. They want power from rivers instead of legs. You wonder if, in 50 or 100 years, people will still stomp in urine. You doubt it. But you hope they remember that someone did. That someone had to. So that the wool might warm the skin. So that the color might hold fast. So that a world might be clothed. It's raining again. Not hard, just a steady, endless drizzle, soaking into the folds of your coat, streaking the cloth hung out to dry, and turning the fuller's yard into a swamp of mud and wool. You could wait it out, but you don't. The wool doesn't wait. The work doesn't pause, not for weather, not for illness, not for aching knees or raw feet. You lower your shoulder, hoist the wet cloth from the vat, and begin again. You are a fuller. This is your rhythm. This is your life. The end of the line. Each bolt of wool you full will go on to someone else. You never see the final product. You don't hold the dyed cloth, or hear the scissors that shape it, or touch the thread that sews it. You're the second link in a long chain. The shepherd shearing the sheep. The spinner turning fleece into thread. The weaver stretching and warping the threads into shape. You, the fuller, tightening, cleansing, and shrinking it. The dyer, the tailor, the seller. The wearer who will never know your name. No one praises a well-fulled tunic. No one admires a clean underlay. But if you do it poorly, if the wool is loose, greasy, or uneven, it's noticed immediately, and the fault is yours. So you learn to be invisible, but precise and strong, a fabric of the land. In England, the best wool comes from the Cotswolds, or the pastures of Lincolnshire, or the green hills of Yorkshire. Each region claims superiority, and merchants pay more for bolts labeled with those origins. But all of it, no matter how fine, ends up in places like this. A fuller's yard on the edge of a town, where cold urine and rain mix in the flagstone cracks, and men and women stomp until the fibers lock together. You fulled cloth from lords' flocks. You fulled coarse cloth from village sheep. Once, You worked a bolt woven from Spanish merino, soft, springy, unlike any other wool you felt. You remember how it behaved differently in the vat, how the fibers seemed eager to shrink, as if grateful to be handled well. That cloth probably became a priest's stole. You'd like to think it held the scent of your hands for just a little while. The final finish. After fulling and rinsing, the cloth is dried and brushed. Not by you, that's for another trade, but you sometimes help. A rough brush, often made with teasels or even burrs, is used to raise the nap. Then it's sheared smooth, cleaned again, and passed along. Sometimes dyers come by your yard to inspect the wool. They press it between fingers, nod, and grunt. Rarely do they speak to you directly. If they do, they call you footman or stamper. You nod, because names don't matter as much as reputation. And your cloth never disappoints. The next generation. One boy, Henry, a distant cousin, has shown interest. He's 12, lean, quick-footed, and already taller than you were at that age. He helped once last winter, stirring the cloth when your knees swelled too badly to move. He didn't flinch at the smell. That surprised you. You've thought about taking him on properly, teaching him the right pressure for stomping, how to judge when a bolt is ready, how to smell the vat and know when the lie is too sharp or too weak. But what kind of life is this to pass on? Still, someone will need to do it. The mills may grow, but there will always be cloth that needs the old way: care, patience, human heat. You wonder if he would carry your name. You wonder if anyone would remember it. The unseen labor. History won't tell your story. Not in full. They will write about kings and laws, wars and plagues, about wool tariffs and trade routes, about uprisings and taxes, but not about the men and women who stomped cloth so hard their heels cracked. Not about the vats of urine that soaked up the lanolin and left behind strength. Not about how hands and feet and sweat made the economy turn, one bolt of cloth at a time. But it was people like you, the laboring unknowns, who made the fabric of a kingdom. And maybe that's enough. A last bolt. There is one final bolt today. Heavy, thick, a grayish weave that looks plain now but will soon be dyed into royal blue. You know the merchant who ordered it. He prefers your fulling to the others, says it holds the dye longer, drapes better. He says this in passing, of course. Never thanks you directly. But still, it matters. You haul the cloth to the tub. The vat stings your feet when you step in. A new batch of lye, a sharper bite. You inhale and begin to tread. Up and down, side to side, back and forth. A rhythm older than memory. Each step brings the fibers tighter. Each stomp is a message passed from your body into the wool. You don't speak. You don't need to. The tread of time. Years from now, this cloth will be part of a wedding dress, or a soldier's cloak, or a scholar's robe. It will keep someone warm, dignified, or safe. And though they will never know you, your effort, your labor will remain there, pressed between the threads, unspoken but essential. Just like all the fullers before you. Just like the ones yet to come. Final reflection. The fuller's work was messy, smelly, and repetitive. It required strength, endurance, and a tolerance for both pain and stench. Yet without the fuller, the medieval wool trade, the backbone of Europe's economy, would have faltered. Every inch of cloth passed through their feet, their hands, their tubs. In a world where even basic sanitation was rare, fullers turned waste into wealth, transforming raw wool into finished fabric by treading through what others discarded. They were rarely named, rarely praised, rarely clean. But they were necessary. And that, in the long thread of history, is its own kind of glory. Story 4, Plague Barrier, Death's Reluctant Assistant. The bell rings again. It's the third time today. That means 3 more dead. You reach for the shovel before the sound even fades. You don't need to ask where, it's always the same now. the alley by the old chapel, the corner near the fishmonger's shop, behind the alehouse, anywhere bodies fall and no one dares to touch them. Because they've died of plague. And you are the one sent to carry them away. You are a plague barrier, a lowly servant of necessity, laboring in the worst days of mankind's memory. Not a doctor, not a priest. You are what comes after hope. You are what remains. The death that walks in silence. It started, they say, with a cough, then a fever, then swelling under the arms and the groin, behind the ears the buboes, black and foul, then vomiting, then blood, then stillness. And then you were called. In 1348 the plague came to England. It came by ship, by rat, by flea. It moved quietly at first, then rapidly. By the time people believed it, it was everywhere. Whole towns emptied, markets closed, priests fled. The courts stopped sitting. The rich fled to the countryside. But the dead stayed behind. And someone had to move them. That someone was you. The job no one wanted. You didn't choose this job. No one chooses to bury plague victims. But the city offered coin, a few groats per day, and more importantly, bread and protection. Not from the plague, of course. No one could offer that. But protection from the law, from hunger, from being cast into the street when you had no work and no family left. You had a strong back, no dependents, and nowhere to go. So you said yes. And every day since, you have carried the dead. Preparation and precaution. There is no uniform, no badge, but you have your tools. A shovel thick and splintered. A cart low and heavy-wheeled. A leather hood soaked in vinegar to mask the smell. A robe waxed to repel the fleas, though you know it doesn't work. You sometimes stuff herbs and flowers into your sleeves, lavender if you can get it, sage if not. Anything to dull the stench of decay and maybe ward off the miasma, the bad air thought to cause the sickness. Some say you should burn brimstone after each burial. Others say you should pray. You do both. But mostly you dig. Digging the pits. Mass graves, plague pits, are dug on the outskirts of town. Some are already partially filled when you arrive, bodies stacked like firewood. Others are still open and raw, earth piled high at the edges. You shovel until your arms ache. The soil is damp, the air too still. Sometimes it takes hours to make a single grave deep enough. You try to dig at least 6 feet, some places say more. But often there's no time, no strength, no space. You've buried 10 people in a single hole, sometimes more. You try not to look at their faces. But sometimes you do. And sometimes you recognize them. The toll of the dead. Some days the bell tolls once or twice. Other days it tolls endlessly. At first there was ceremony, priests came, relatives followed, psalms were sung. Now no one follows the cart. No one reads prayers, the churches are closed, the graveyards full. The dead are anonymous, wrapped in sheets, sometimes not even that. You tie rags around your face and load the bodies into your cart. A man, a woman, a child. A child. Too small, too light. You remember someone saying children wouldn't catch it. They were wrong. Alone in the streets. When you walk the streets, people scatter. Even if you're not pushing a cart, even if you've just bathed, even if the wind is blowing in your favor. They know who you are. The plague barrier. To some, you are a servant of mercy. To others, an omen of death. You don't argue either way. You just walk. Your footsteps the only sound in alleys, once filled with merchants and music. A life of isolation. You no longer live in your old quarters. The landlord put your things in the street. You sleep now in an empty stable behind the almoner's house. No one disturbs you there. You keep your belongings in a sack, clothes, bread crusts, a cracked mug, your mother's rosary. You haven't seen another human face up close in weeks. Even your fellow buriers keep their distance. At first you tried to talk, now silence feels safer. You begin to think of yourself as something other than human. A function, a wheel in a machine made of loss. Night burials. Sometimes the bell rings at night. More often now. You light a lantern and go. The cart creaks as you push it through puddles. The body lies near a door, wrapped in a curtain. A note is pinned to it. No one left. You lift it carefully. You are careful always. You used to fear touching them. Now you just fear not feeling anything at all. You bury them by lantern light. The earth is wet, the grave shallow. You pray a short prayer. You never hear back. But you say it anyway. What you've learned. You've learned things no one teaches. How to listen for rats in the walls of empty houses. How to avoid dogs that now roam in packs. How to hold your breath when the smell becomes too much. How to judge if a corpse is safe to move or too far gone. You've also learned how quickly people forget names, and how silence spreads faster than sickness. A sudden chain. Today, something strange happened. You were burying a woman middle-aged, well-dressed, a ring still on her finger, and as you laid her in the pit, her hand moved. You dropped her, staggered back, but nothing else happened. Was it the nerves, a twitch, a muscle releasing tension? You tell yourself that. But now, as night falls and the wind returns, you cannot sleep. You stare at your hands. You wonder if she was alive. You wonder how many others might have been. You wonder if the plague can do that. Ending section thought. You've seen so much death that you no longer dream of life, only of the earth, the weight of it, the feel of the shovel in your hands, the sound of soil falling over linen-wrapped skin. You tell yourself you are helping, that the dead must be buried, that the living must be spared the sight. But tonight you wonder, when the plague is gone, will there be any work left for you, or will the silence bury you too? The rains haven't stopped for days. The earth, already heavy with the dead, has turned to slick black clay. Digging now means carving trenches in soup your shovel sinks in and comes back with more water than soil. It's harder to stack the bodies, harder to stand, harder to breathe. But the bell still tolls, and the city, though quieter than before, still dies. A job for the desperate. You weren't the first plague barrier in your town. The first one was a cooper, they say, a barrel maker whose business collapsed when wine shipments stopped. He lasted a month, then a rat bit him. The second was a gravedigger already employed by the church. He disappeared. Maybe he ran. Maybe he was buried in one of his own pits. Then came the drunk, who only showed up for the bread and was gone after 3 days. And then you. Steady hands, silent mouth, back that didn't bend too soon. Now you are the longest lasting of them all. A fact not worth celebrating. Plague by the numbers. You no longer count the bodies. But someone does. Somewhere in the priory, scribes keep tallies. They scratch the numbers onto parchment already stained with tears and wax. In larger towns, weekly bills of mortality list the names of the dead until there are too many, and then the names give way to tallies, then just ink marks, then nothing. Died of pestilence. Died suddenly. Found dead. Unknown. At first, every body meant someone you knew. A neighbor, a tradesman, a child who once threw stones at your door. Then the faces became blurs. Eyes you never opened, mouths you no longer closed, limbs you left as they were because the cloth around them had already stiffened. And still the pit must be filled. The smell of a dying world. There is no way to explain the smell of plague. It is not just rot. It is sweet, cloying, wrong. It sticks to your throat like spoiled honey, clings to your tongue. The plague eats from the inside out, first the lymph, then the blood, then the skin. Bodies leak. Some burst. Some twist into shapes that suggest they fought death and lost violently. You've learned to breathe through a vinegar-soaked cloth, though it only dulls the worst of it. Others carry posies of herbs in their sleeves: rue, rosemary, thyme. You tried that once. The posy wilted in the first hour. Now you carry nothing. Because what are flowers in a world without breath? A visit from authority. One day, a magistrate's man came to you. He wore gloves, a mask. He did not approach too closely. He asked if you were still able to bury. You nodded. He asked if you'd seen any suspicious gatherings: priests holding illegal masses, healers spreading false cures. You shook your head. Then he handed you something, a scrap of paper with an address and 2 names. Special burials, he said. They paid for privacy. You went. It was a large house, empty save for 2 bodies already wrapped in linen. No sign of illness on them, but their stillness was too perfect. Perhaps it was poison, perhaps it was fear. You buried them apart from the others, as instructed. You said no prayers that day, because sometimes silence is the only ritual left. The ritual of the pit. Each day has a rhythm now. Wake with the bell. Load the cart. Pull the hood tight. Avoid the dogs. Avoid the eyes of the living. Dig. Stack. Cover. Return. Repeat. You eat when you can. Bread that crumbles. Cheese that sweats in your pocket. Water from barrels that may not be clean but are cold. You sleep when your arms fail you. Sometimes in the stable, sometimes in the cart itself. Sometimes sitting upright against the wall, shovel still in hand, as if even sleep might demand you dig. The bodies left behind. You've seen them left in doorways, in beds, in piles, not out of cruelty but out of fear. Families died one by one, and the last survivor had no one left to call. Or they died all at once, and the neighbors dared not knock. You found entire households, chairs overturned, pots still warm, a dog curled beside a body. You've learned to look at the eyes. If they're open, they died suddenly. If they're closed, someone was there. That comforts you strangely. The thought that someone was there. Burial songs. In the beginning, you sang. Simple hymns half remembered from your childhood, the ones about rising again, the ones about peace. Now your voice is hoarse. Now you hum when you have breath left. But even that's fading. The silence of the dead is contagious. A new kind of fear. Lately, you've begun to feel it. The tightness in the chest, the night sweats, the ache behind the eyes. You try to explain it away: exhaustion, perhaps, too little food, the cold creeping in. But in the back of your mind, the question grows. Have you finally joined them? Are you just digging your own bed, one day at a time? You press a hand to your neck. No swelling. Not yet. What you still hold on to. You still carry your mother's rosary. You don't pray often, not aloud, not formally. But your fingers find the beads. Especially after a long day. Especially when you pass a child's body. Especially when the wind smells like blood and ash. The beads are worn smooth now. Like your voice, like your hands, like your memories. But they are yours. And they remind you of a time before the bells. Tonight the moon hangs low. You walk home with an empty cart. The streets are damp, silent, dark. You pass a house with candlelight still burning behind the shutters. Someone survived there. You nod though no one sees you. And for a moment, you feel the thing that used to be called hope. It flickers small, soft. But enough. You stop in the middle of the road. It's early before the sun has risen and the city is still. Not silent exactly, but still. No bells, no carts, no screams, no dogs barking from behind boarded-up doors. The absence feels heavier than the plague ever did. For the first time in what feels like a lifetime, there are no bodies to collect. When the silence begins. It started last week. Fewer bells, fewer calls. The carts weren't filled to the brim. One day you returned from the pits with strength still left in your arms. Another day you saw a window open, not to throw out a corpse but to let in the sun. The plague has not ended. You know better than to believe that. But something has shifted. The streets no longer smell entirely of death. Something else is returning. Life perhaps, or what's left of it. What remains? The city has changed. You walk past the baker's shop. It's shuttered but intact. The butcher's stall is empty. The tavern doors hang half open, as if unsure whether to admit the living or keep out the memory of the dead. You pass homes you once entered with a cart and left with a single body or 5. They're quiet now, empty. The plague burned through them like fire through dry grass. Some buildings are boarded shut, marked with a red X or a painted cross, sealed until someone decides they are safe again, if anyone ever does. Others stand open, looted or abandoned, a boot in the road, a torn shawl caught in a shutter. Signs of people who tried to escape. Most didn't. What you've become. You don't feel human anymore. Not quite. You haven't spoken to another person in 3 days. You've forgotten what your voice sounds like without a mask muffling it. Your hands move without thought. You dream in shallow pits and linen shrouds. You wonder if this is what the dead felt just before the end, a soft unraveling. Not pain, but absence. You carry your shovel even when it's not needed. It rests against your shoulder like an extension of your body. You think of putting it down. You don't. You wouldn't know what to do without it. A glimpse of the living. On your 4th day without a burial, you see someone. A woman young, maybe 20, kneeling outside a church. She's scrubbing the steps with water and ash. A candle burns beside her. She sees you. She doesn't run. Instead, she nods just once. You nod back. No words. But in that glance is everything. Shared pain, shared silence, the recognition of survival. You walk on. A visit to the pit. You return to the pit that evening. Not because there's work, but because it feels wrong not to. You stand at the edge looking down. The earth is uneven, rushed, panicked, filled in too fast during the worst weeks. You remember the exact days when it filled. You remember faces, wrappings, tiny bundles. You do not cry. You passed that threshold weeks ago, maybe months. But you bow your head. And you speak a name. Just one. Someone you never told anyone about. Your brother. Dead in the 2nd week. No bell, no funeral. Just you in a cart. You whisper his name again. The wind carries it away. The return of the church. The priest has returned. He's thinner, paler, older somehow. He was gone for weeks, no one knows where. Now he rings the bell again at noon, not for the dead, for Mass. You stand outside the chapel and listen. You don't go in. You're not sure you're welcome, or if you'd even want to be. But you listen. And for the first time in months, it's not a funeral song. Bread and ashes. Food is scarce. The markets have not returned. The granaries are half empty. But there are loaves again, coarse, sour, dense. The baker's daughter trades you one for firewood. She doesn't speak. But she doesn't look away either. People are learning how to look at each other again. It's hard, but it's beginning. What they'll forget. They'll say the plague ended in 1350, that it vanished like smoke, that the city rebuilt, the dead were buried, the streets scrubbed, the bells rung once more. They'll name the merchants who survived, the priests who returned, the doctors who wrote treatises. They will not name you. They will not remember the days when you were the only one moving. When you stood in the pit alone, with a shovel and a prayer you barely believed. They will not speak of the stench, or the silence, or the weight of carrying 5 bodies a day. But it happened, and you remember. When the cart is emptied. One morning, you burn your cart. It has sat unused for a week now. The wood is stained, splintered, dark with years of use. You roll it out to the fields behind the stable, pile it with straw and brush, and light a torch. The fire climbs quickly. It is quiet, almost reverent. No one watches, no one asks. The smoke rises into the blue sky, and for the first time in months, you smell only wood and wind. Reflection, a world built on the dead. The plague did not end cleanly. It faded, it changed. It made its way into hearts and memories and lingered there. And those who survived bore it with them, always not on their skin but in their silence. But cities did rebuild, markets reopened, children were born again. Life returned. Because people like you stayed behind to bury the dead, so that others could begin anew without stepping over the past. You were not a doctor. You were not a healer. You were not remembered. But you were necessary. You gave the dying their last kindness, and the living their future. Story 5, Rat Catcher, Silent Hunter in the Shadows. You hear them before you see them. The faint scratching in the walls, the patter of tiny feet across rafters and floorboards, the soft, wet gnawing on a hunk of bread left too close to the hearth. It's early morning and the city is still asleep or pretending to be, but you are already working. Because rats never sleep long. And neither do you. You are a rat catcher, a necessary figure in the medieval ecosystem. Half pest controller, half street myth, and entirely underappreciated. You work in alleys, kitchens, sewers, cellars, and everywhere in between. The people call you when they hear the sounds that send chills down their spines. You go where others will not. Because the rats are always there. Waiting. The city of vermin. This is 14th century England, though the exact year doesn't much matter. Whether in London, York, Norwich, or Bristol, the story is the same. The cities are crowded. Waste clogs the alleys. Meat rots in the sun. Grain is stored poorly. Livestock sleep beneath beds. Water is fetched in buckets from troughs shared by animals and humans alike. It is, in every sense, a paradise for rats. They are brown or black, short-tailed or long, bold or cautious. Some live in sewers, others in kitchens. Some burrow under cobblestones. Others live in the rafters of manors. They breed quickly. They eat everything, and they spread disease. You know that last part, even if no one else does yet. A trade in shadows. You don't advertise. People find you by word of mouth, or they find you waiting near the market wall just before dawn, where you sit with a battered sack and a stick sharpened to a point. You're not the only catcher in town, but you've been doing it the longest. Others try and give up. Because it's not just about traps. It's about patience, awareness, nerves, and perhaps a little cruelty. You use everything at your disposal. Wooden traps with spring-loaded arms and jagged teeth. Pitfalls dug into cellar floors and disguised with cloth and bait. Smoke blown into holes to drive the rats out. Oil poured into barrels where they fall and drown. And most importantly, terriers. You have two, Flint and Gutter, both trained from pups to kill fast and without pause. They sleep at your feet, eat beside you, and sometimes bleed for your wages. You would trade your cloak before you'd trade either dog. Payment and fear. No one enjoys your presence. You smell like ash, dog fur, and old blood. Your nails are dirty. Your boots are patched with rat hide. Children are told you'll catch them if they misbehave. Women pull their skirts away when you walk past. Men nod but do not speak. But when they hear scratching in the walls, they come running. You're paid in coin if you're lucky, in bread or ale if you're not. Once, A landlord paid you with a cracked pot of lard and a sack of turnips. You took it. Because rat catchers don't negotiate. They accept what they're given, do their work, and vanish. The plague connection. You've begun to notice a pattern. Rats appear just before the sickness. More of them, bolder, climbing into beds, dying in the open, and after them come the fevers, the swellings, the black marks. People blame bad air, bad thoughts, bad luck. But you know better. You've cut open rats before, seen the fleas, black and bloated, crawling through their fur like a second skin. You've seen them leap onto your boots, bite your dogs. You know the rats carry something invisible, something deathly. You tried to tell a priest once. He said it was God's punishment, not vermin. You don't argue anymore. Into the sewers. The worst work is below. Down into the drains where the runoff from chamber pots, kitchens, and slaughterhouses all mingle into a thick brown slurry. The smell is unbearable. The light is worse. Lanterns sputter in the damp. The walls are close, the air tight, the ceilings low. But the rats down here are the worst. Big as cats, some move in packs. You once saw 3 strip a pigeon to bone in less than a minute. You don't go alone anymore. Flint and Gutter run ahead, ears perked. You move slowly, one step at a time, your stick ready. The sounds echo strangely here. A splash can sound like a shout, a rat's squeal like a child's cry. You follow the smell of grain and blood. The nest. In the back of a slaughterhouse cellar, you find one. A nest. At least 20 of them. Sleeping, fighting, gnawing, birthing, rats upon rats. The walls shimmer with movement, the floor pulses, your dogs growl, you don't wait. You let them go. Flint strikes first, fast and brutal. Gutter lunges. You swing your stick again and again. The nest erupts, screams, bites. Blood, you don't flinch. You've been bit before, you've bled before. When it's over, the floor is wet and silent. You count 17 bodies, maybe more. You throw them into your sack and carry them out. Because people don't believe you unless they see the dead. The stain on the city. Later that night, you burn them. Not for show, not for science, just for safety. You've learned that leaving them rotting draws more. You burn them in an alley behind a tanner's shed. The wind shifts and the smoke hits your face. You don't turn away. You think of the family in the South Quarter who called you last week. All 4 dead now. The rats came first, then the sickness, then silence. You told them to leave. They didn't. Now the rats have moved on. And so have you. A moment of doubt. You return home, 1 room, straw mattress, 2 dogs curled at your feet. You eat slowly, bread soaked in broth, nothing fancy. You press a cloth to the bite on your hand. It throbs. You think, will this be the one? You've buried other rat catchers. You've seen what a single bite can do. You fall asleep with your hand wrapped in vinegar-soaked linen. The dogs whimper in their sleep. End of section. Reflection. You've spent your life hunting shadows, creatures that survive off the carelessness of others. You've watched them multiply, adapt, swarm. And still no one listens. No one sees what you see. No one hears what you hear. But you wonder, when the rats are gone, what happens to the man who chased them? You wake before sunrise. Not because you want to, but because they wake first. You hear them, always. The faint rustle inside the walls, the whisper of fur on stone, the soft scratch that has haunted you for years. To most people, it's the sound of the city breathing. To you, it's work. You check your hand, the bite is healing, barely. You feed Flint and Gutter. You eat what's left from yesterday. Then you gather your traps, your sack, your stick, and your resolve. Because today, the castle steward has summoned you. Rats in high places. The steward waits by the gate, his boots clean and his nose crinkled in disgust the moment he sees you. You're the rat catcher, he says, as if confirming something disappointing. You nod. He explains quickly. There are rats in the granaries again. The castle baker found droppings in the flour bins. A servant saw one running beneath the stairs. A visiting priest claims he woke to one gnawing on his slipper. Unacceptable, embarrassing, dangerous. Especially with a feast planned next week. He leads you into the stone passages, with a cloth pressed over his face. You don't bother covering yours. You're used to the stink of Noble Kitchen's old meat, wet rushes, spoiled fat, and now rats. The castle hunt. You begin in the pantry. Flour barrels, oats, dried meat, crumbs everywhere. A paradise for vermin. You crouch listening. Gutter whines once, you wait. Then a blur. Fast, clever, small. You spring your trap and catch it mid-leap. Flint lunges and dispatches another. You grab two more with your gloved hand. The steward watches in horror. You toss the corpses into your sack. He says, "Are they diseased?" You answer honestly, "Probably." He steps back quickly. Old tricks. You've learned 100 ways to catch rats. Some work better than others. A pot, a smear of lard, and a polished stick balanced across the rim. An iron cage baited with spoiled cheese and straw soaked in pig's blood. A bucket trap set at the top of the stairs where they pass in the dark. But your best method is understanding rats. You know where they walk, where they nest, where they breed. And you know that rats are watching you, just as you are watching them. They test traps, they learn, they remember. Some seem to survive impossible odds. You've met rats that limp, rats with one eye, rats that live long enough to teach others. You call them the old kings. And when you see one, you kill it first. The signs of a swarm. The steward's concern is just the beginning. You've seen it before a slow invasion, signs appearing one by one. Chewed grain sacks. Droppings in corners. Bite marks on bread crusts left too long. Then come the scratches at night. Then the visible rats. Then the smell, an oily, musky taint that lingers in corners and clings to the skin. Finally, the illness. Always the same pattern. People don't connect the dots until it's too late. But you see it starting here. And this time, it's not just cellars and sewers. It's halls. It's nobles' kitchens. It's priests and courtiers and stewards. You try to warn them. They scoff. They ask if you'll wash first, next time you enter. You say nothing. But you stay longer than you're paid for. Because this infestation is bigger than usual. The dead ones. That night, you return with 36 corpses. You lay them in a row behind the tanner's shed, as always. And you notice something strange. Too many of them are already dying. Not caught, not poisoned, not torn apart. Just dying. Thin, sluggish, covered in fleas. You pull one from your sack, its belly is bloated, its gums blackened. You've seen this before. Plague rats. The kind that die before the people do. The kind that warn you if you know how to listen. You light the fire and watch them burn. And you don't sleep that night. An old memory. You remember your first rat. You were just a child, small hands, no boots. Your mother screamed and told you to catch it before it bit your sister. You used a boot. You killed it. Then another came, then 5 more. Your father said it was a curse from the neighbors. He set a trap, it worked once. After that, you kept a knife under your cot. And by the time you were grown, you were the only one left who wasn't afraid to face them. People began to whisper your name. Not kindly, but they whispered. The village call. A boy finds you in the morning. He's out of breath, muddy, desperate. There's a farm, he says, near the mill pond. They're everywhere. You go. It's worse than you imagined. The grain barn has collapsed not from fire or wind, but from the sheer number of rats inside. They've burrowed into the floor, the beams, the walls. Hundreds of them. You see their eyes, their teeth, their oily backs as they pour from holes like water. You don't hesitate. You unleash flint and gutter. You swing your stick like a scythe. You don't win, not fully, not today. But you drive them back. And you mark that place in your mind. Because when rats run like that, they're not just running toward food. They're running from something worse. When people start to listen. 2 days later, a girl in town dies. No wounds, no warning. Just fever, swelling, and silence. You watch as they carry her out wrapped in cloth. Someone turns to you. You think it's the rats. You nod once. No one laughs this time. You return to your corner behind the market wall, dogs at your feet, sack resting against your leg. People give you a wider berth than usual. Because now they don't just think you smell. They think you know something. And maybe you do. Because rats are never just rats. They are warnings. They are omens. And you've spent your whole life listening. You've stopped trying to count them. The rats, that is. There are too many. They're everywhere. In walls, under floors, inside beds, across church pews, behind wine barrels, on the roofs at night. You've even seen one climb the ropes in the bell tower, dangling like a shadow just before the morning bell rang. You used to trap and kill them one at a time. Now you work in piles. And still they come. A city teetering. This is not an ordinary infestation. You've lived through plenty of those when the docks overflowed with grain, or when a summer festival left refuse baking in the streets. Those were predictable, containable. This is different. The rats are restless, panicked, sometimes aggressive in ways you've never seen. They gnaw through doors. They chew leather, linen, and bone. You found one chewing another. Worse, they're dying again. Not in traps, not by poison, just dying. And wherever they die, someone follows. You don't speak much, but people notice that you're quiet. They sense you're watching, waiting. And now they come to you. The same people who once crossed the street to avoid you. The house no one enters. The steward returns. He doesn't mock this time. His face is pale. There's a house, he says, by the chapel, sealed up. No one's been inside in weeks, but we hear things. You know what that means. You take your dogs, your stick, your sack, a lantern. The house is cold, too quiet. The windows are fogged from the inside. The door creaks open reluctantly. The smell hits first, a fermented, sweet rot more than decay. Disease. You don't need to see the bodies. But you do. 5 of them, 2 adults, 3 children, covered in cloth and flies, and around them rats. Dozens. You kill what you can. Burn what you must. And when you step back into the daylight, the steward won't meet your eyes. He already knows. Rumors and reality. The whispers are everywhere now. Plague, they say. No bad meat. No a curse. No foreigners. No the rats. You don't correct them. You don't explain what you've seen: the plague, fleas, swollen on rat backs, the sickness in rat blood, the pattern of illness that matches the movement of the vermin. They wouldn't believe you. They never really have. But they fear you now. That's almost as good. The disappearance of the catchers. 2 other rat catchers are gone. One vanished. The other died in his sleep, bleeding from his mouth, hands rigid. You knew him, Harbin. He always bragged about the traps he made, about the scars on his hands. You buried him yourself. In the field where the dogs run. He had no kin. You said nothing. But your dog sat beside you, watching, silent. They understand grief better than most men. A bitter honor. The town council, what's left of it, calls on you. They want advice. They want traps set at the edges of town where rats are coming in droves. They ask about poison, Smoke, dogs. They ask how much time they have. You give them all the truth you can afford. Not much. They give you coin. You use it to buy more vinegar, more oil, more leather to patch your boots. You don't feel richer, but you feel seen, if only briefly. Final infestation. It happens quickly. The granary collapses, floor eaten away by a network of burrows. Dozens of rats escape. Flint kills 4 before you've even unslung your sack. The baker's wife is bitten in the thigh. The mayor's son dies the next morning. You set fire to the granary that night. No one stops you. No one says a word. They watch as you stand by the flames, the smoke thick, the dogs flanking you like shadows. And in that moment, you feel what it's like to be part of the city, not under it. The dogs know. Flint and Gutter are tired. Older now. Gutter limps from a fight 2 nights ago. Flint's eyes are cloudy. They still hunt, still bite, still tear, but they're changing, slowing. You've started keeping them closer to home, even as the rats grow bolder. You train 2 new pups. They learn quickly. But they're not the same. You know what the dogs have seen. You know what they carry. You don't talk to them, but you understand them. Because you're changing too. What you leave behind. You think about writing it down. Everything you've learned. The life cycle of the rats. How they spread with grain and die before sickness comes. The link between fleas and fever. The safe spot, the dangerous signs. But who would read it? You can barely read it yourself. And no one wants to hear the rat catcher's theories. So instead, you pass it on to the new catchers, to the boys who shadow you in alleys. You teach them not just how to kill, but when to watch, what to smell, what to hear. Some listen. Most don't. But one day, one of them might see it all again. And maybe they'll know what you knew too late. Closing reflection. The hunter fades. The rats will never truly go. You've accepted that. They vanish for a season. Then they return. In the fields, in the gutters, in the cellars of rich men who never see the shadow under their bed. And with them comes something else: sickness, silence, fear. But maybe somewhere there will always be a catcher. A quiet figure with a dog at his side and a sack in his hand. Someone who listens to the sounds behind the walls. Who sees what others won't. Who walks among shadows. And when the scratching starts again, you hope someone like you will be there. Story 6, Treadmill Operator, Human Hamster of the Castle Keep. You are already sweating, and the sun hasn't risen yet. Your hands ache, your feet are numb, but still you climb one slow, steady step after another, not up a mountain, not into battle. You are climbing inside a giant wooden wheel, bound in iron, creaking with every movement, built into the wall of a stone fortress. It is not a symbol of power. It is a machine. And you are what makes it turn. You are a treadmill operator, a human engine in a medieval world. Not a soldier, not a craftsman, not a knight. You are the muscle behind the machines. And you walk endlessly for someone else's war, someone else's castle, someone else's god. A machine before its time. The medieval treadmill, sometimes called a treadwheel crane, was one of the most advanced pieces of machinery in its day. A massive wheel, often more than 8 feet in diameter, mounted horizontally or vertically. 2 men walked inside it like giant hamsters, providing the motive power to hoist blocks of stone, barrels of grain, or buckets of water. It was simple, brutal engineering. Where oxen wouldn't fit and watermills couldn't reach, you did the work. Your legs replaced horsepower. Your back bore the weight of entire keeps. And no one knew your name. The castle's beating hard. The wheel sits inside the hoist tower, connected by ropes and pulleys to cranes that lift supplies from the outer yard or down into the well shaft. In some castles, it's mounted directly over the drawbridge pit, lifting the gate up and down. Elsewhere, it powers hoists for siege engines or helps raise enormous stones during construction. But whatever it lifts, it requires the same thing. Men like you, walking in rhythm, sweating into the wood, sometimes slipping, sometimes fainting, never stopping. You are the heartbeat of the castle's lungs. And when you stop walking, everything stops with you. How you got here. You didn't choose this job, most don't. You were born to a carpenter in a nearby village. You tried working wood, but your hands were too slow. You tried farming, but the land wasn't yours. And when your father died in debt, you were offered a choice, prison or work. So you came to the castle. You expected masonry or field labor. Instead, you were brought to the hoist room. And they said, climb in. You did. And you've been climbing ever since. The climb without end. The work is punishing. You walk on planks slick with old sweat and damp air. The interior of the wheel smells of iron and mildew. It creaks and groans like a wounded beast. Every step you take pulls a load upward or lowers it slowly, depending on the task. If you move too fast, you unbalance the rope. If you move too slow, the load stops or worse, crashes down. Sometimes it's flour, sometimes it's lumber. Once it was a bishop, hoisted in a chair to the top of the keep. He didn't even look at you. The men beside you. You're never alone in the wheel. There's always at least one other, sometimes two, depending on the weight. You don't always know their names. The work doesn't allow for talking. But you know them by footfall. There's Hale, the big one, who stomps like thunder and always smells of mead. Little Wren, who sings under his breath and once passed out mid-step. Old Martin, who's done this longer than anyone and walks like he's already halfway to the grave. You walk together. You sweat together. Sometimes you bleed together. But when the shift ends, you don't speak. Not because of bitterness. Because there's nothing left to say. Risks and ruin. It seems simple, walk in a wheel. But this job kills. The tread can crack beneath you. The ropes can snap. If a load is too heavy and the brakes fail, the wheel can reverse, suddenly sending you flying like a rag doll against the walls. You've seen it happen. One man broke his leg. Another lost his arm in the pulley gears. There's blood in the grain chute that's never been cleaned. But no one stops the wheel. There is always more to lift. Always another load. Always another man to climb inside. A place in the machine. No one asks your opinion. When the foreman points, you climb in. When the load is tied, you begin walking. When the bell rings, you stop. That's the rhythm, the law, the silence you work in. Yet somehow, you know the castle better than its lord. You know the ropes, the weights, the groan of the beam when the balance is off, the subtle way the pulley creaks when it's about to fray. You could walk this wheel blindfolded. And one day you might. The treadmill as metaphor. There's a joke among the wheelmen, not really a joke, more of a curse. When you die, the wheel keeps turning. You just walk in it quieter. You used to laugh at that. Now you wonder if it's true. Sometimes you dream of walking. Not running, not resting. Just walking. Step by step. Nowhere. You once asked the foreman how many stones you'd lifted in your years at the wheel. He shrugged, said it didn't matter. They're all part of the wall now. And maybe he's right. Maybe the work you've done is buried in the fortress above you, invisible to the nobles dining in halls you helped raise. But still you wonder. When the wheel stops, who remembers the ones who walked it? Your body knows the rhythm better than your mind. Each day it begins before thought. Rise, eat what little you have, stretch out the stiffness in your legs and make your way to the hoist room. You don't even look at the wheel anymore. You just step inside it like slipping into your own skin. And the wood groans to greet you. Not a warm sound, but a familiar one. When the castle breathes, the treadmill is not just for lifting things. In some fortresses like the one you serve, it powers the drawbridge, raising and lowering the heavy beams that defend the outer gate. On certain days, when the Lord is in residence or visitors arrive from the king's court, you are ordered to the wheel to open the keep itself. You hear the order from the hall above. You climb in with another operator, and you walk. The chains rattle, the gate lifts, stone trembles. And above you the world turns. You walk to open the kingdom, and you walk again to close it. No one sees you do it, but they hear the result. A noble's view. There was a time, early in your years at the wheel, when a young nobleman visited the tower. He asked to see the engine after dinner. He arrived with 2 companions, wearing fine gloves and silk slippers. They peered at you through the slats, at your sweat-soaked shirt, your bleeding heel, the dogs asleep in the corner, and the salted meat hung from a hook to keep the rats away. The noble asked how long you walked each day. You told him, as long as needed. He laughed, said, like a beast then. You didn't answer, because what would be the point? The days without end. You work in all weather. Rain you walk. Snow you walk. Siege you walk faster. During one siege, the hoist was used to lift boiling oil to the battlements. You worked 12 hours without stopping, muscles screaming, skin blistered. The men above cheered as they poured the oil on the invaders. You heard screams that weren't yours for once. You never saw the battle. Only the load. Only the rope. Only the wheel. The wheel and the bell. Each shift is marked by a bell, a simple chime that rings at dawn, midday, and dusk. 3 shifts, 3 teams, 3 rotations. But there are days the bell doesn't ring. Those are the worst days. Because when the bell is silent, you don't know if you're at the beginning or the end. You just walk and wait and wonder. One day, the bell didn't ring for 2 days. No food, no voices, only the sound of your own footsteps echoing in the wood. You kept walking. You didn't know what else to do. When the bell finally rang again, you wept. You told no one. Small acts of resistance. You have few ways to fight back. But there are small rebellions. Slowing your pace by half a step when the overseer isn't watching. Spitting on the ropes that burn your hands. Sharing bread with another walker when yours is fresh and theirs is moldy. Scratching marks into the wheel frame notches for every week survived. You think the wheel is marked by many hands now. Not just yours. A collective ledger. Proof you existed. The toll on the body. Your legs are strong, unnaturally so, but the rest of you is broken. Your knees ache when it rains. Your back is twisted slightly to the left. One shoulder sits higher than the other. Your arms shake when you try to lift anything more delicate than rope. And your feet, they've become leather calloused, cracked, swollen. Some days you feel your toenails lifting. You don't look. You just bandage and keep going. A moment of collapse. One morning, Hale, the big man, collapses beside you. No cry, no groan. Just one step missed and then he drops face first into the wheel. You stop, the load jerks, the rope creaks. You brace your foot against the inner rim, heart racing. Others come. He's dragged out, breathing but not speaking. He doesn't return the next day. Or the day after. He's replaced by a boy, no older than 13. Too light for the wheel, you have to walk harder to compensate. You say nothing. Because you did the same once. The sounds above. Sometimes you hear music. Not often, but during feasts or weddings or the rare victory celebration, songs echo down the shaft from the great hall. Lutes, drums, voices. You can't make out the words, but you know the rhythm. You walk to it. just for a moment, just to remember you are human. Then the music stops, and you keep walking, a machine that outlives its makers. Old Martin is gone now. They say he slipped down the stairs and broke his neck. More likely, his body just gave out. He walked the wheel for 20 years, more than anyone. You never heard him complain, never saw him cry. He left behind a pair of gloves and a carved bone whistle. You keep the whistle in your pouch. You don't blow it. Not yet. Maybe one day. When the wheel is still. End of section. Reflection. There is no monument to the treadmill operator. No stained glass, no ballads, no carved stone in the cloister garden. But every castle wall you helped raise. Every stone hoisted. Every grain sack lifted from mud to mouth. It bears the invisible imprint of your footsteps. They'll never know it. But you do. Still, you ask yourself, when my legs finally fail, will the wheel even notice I've stopped? You no longer dream of standing still. When you sleep, if you sleep, you still feel the arc of the wheel beneath your feet, the sway of the rope as the load rises, the hiss of wood against skin. Even now, when you lie in the straw-stuffed sackcloth that passes for a bed, your legs twitch in rhythm. The wheel does not let go. Not even in your dreams. A day like any other. This morning, the fog is thick in the courtyard. You can barely see the ramparts as you walk toward the tower. Everything is quiet. Too quiet. No call from the foreman, no bell. But the load is waiting. A barrel of salted meat meant for the storeroom above. You don't question it. You simply step inside the wheel. Gutter and Flint are long gone now. The new dogs Ash and Mara watch you silently from the doorway. Their ears twitch. They've learned to expect no praise, only the rhythm of your steps. The creak begins. The strain in your calves arrives almost immediately. But you walk. The burden of memory. There was a time when the castle was new. Not new in stone, these walls have stood longer than you've been alive, but new in its feeling. Full, vibrant, a market below, soldiers training, blacksmiths hammering. Now it's quieter. The lord is older, the guards fewer. Many of the servants have left. Rumors of war in the south, plague in the east, taxes rising, grain vanishing. Tithes demanded from villagers already bled dry. You hear the gossip when no one thinks you're listening. And you carry it like you carry everything else. On your shoulders, in your silence. One more load. Today they ask you to lift stone, a task you haven't done in months. Repairs on the outer wall, an old collapse. You're joined by a boy you've never met, too thin, hands blistered before the first turn. He doesn't complain. He learns your pace quickly. You don't speak to him, but when the rope jerks, you both adjust. When the pulley moans, you both slow. When the load crests the window slot above, you both stop in perfect unison. When the bell rings for changeover, he doesn't leave right away. He looks at you and says, "How do you do it?" You don't answer, because the answer is, you just keep going. The wheel stops. Later that week it happens. Your wheel splinters. Not from overuse, but from rot. The axle cracks, a beam snaps, the rope goes slack, and for the first time in years the tower is silent. No creak. No footfall. No motion. The hoist is shut down. The castle steward says repairs will take some weeks. The engineers come to assess. There is talk of replacing it with a better model one with a counterweight system. Fewer workers needed, less risk. More efficient. They say the new one may not need walkers at all. A day without the wheel. You are told to rest. You don't know what to do. You walk the halls. You sit by the well. You clean your boots. You stare at your hands. You watch the clouds and try to remember a time when you weren't moving in a circle. At night, your legs burn with the absence of motion. Ash whines at your side. You wonder if this is what dying feels like. Not pain, not fear. Stillness. The offer. A night squire approaches you one morning. He says his master has seen your strength, your endurance. He needs a man to carry gear on the next campaign, not a soldier, a bearer. It would mean leaving the castle, marching south, seeing fields, rivers, sky, and maybe never walking the wheel again. You don't answer. Not yet. Saying goodbye. You return to the tower one last time. The wheel is still there, broken, half dismantled. Ropes hang limp. The marks you and others carved into the beams, the quiet record of 1,000 forgotten footsteps, are still faintly visible. You trace your finger along one, and you leave something behind. Old Martin's whistle. You place it on the axle beam, not as a gift, but as a gravestone. A last reflection. The wheel made you strong. It also bent you. It taught you endurance but demanded your silence. It taught you rhythm but stole your freedom. You were a beast of burden in a place that depended on invisible labor, yours and others. You built its walls, lifted its grain, hoisted its pride. And now, you are free, or something like it. You don't know what lies beyond the castle walls, but your legs are strong, and still moving. Final thought. They will not write about the treadmill operators. No poet will rhyme your name, but they will sleep beneath roofs you raised, eat from stores you lifted, and pray behind walls that stood because you kept walking. And maybe that's enough, because someone has to walk in place, so the rest of the world can move forward. Story 7, Turnspit Dog Keeper, Cooking with Canine Labor. There's barking in the kitchens again. Not the kind of bark you hear from hunting hounds baying across the countryside, or watchdogs growling at thieves by torchlight. This is different, strained, constant, almost rhythmic. Because the dog isn't barking at someone. He's barking at the roast. More accurately, he's barking while running in place inside a wooden wheel like some small beast trapped in an oversized hamster cage. His paws blur with effort. The wheel turns, the spit turns, and the goose begins to brown. You stand beside it, watching carefully, because you're the one who trained him. You are a turnspit dog keeper, a caretaker of one of the most peculiar forms of medieval culinary labor. A job that exists in the shadows of noble kitchens, known only by its smell of grease, smoke, and singed fur. The spit behind the banquet. Everyone talks about the food. The roast boar glistening with honeyed apples, the pheasant stuffed with breadcrumbs and herbs, the hare basted and crisp. In every noble household from Tudor England to Georgian Wales, the spit is the centerpiece of the feast. But few ever ask, who turned the spit? And the answer is almost always, not a man. It was a dog. A special breed, small and muscular, low to the ground but built for endurance. Known as a turnspit, these dogs were bred for one task alone, running in a wheel mounted beside the kitchen fire, attached to a system of gears that rotated the spit evenly for hours. You keep them trained. You keep them alive. You keep them running. The kitchen's furnace. The heat is unbearable. The hearth blazes at full strength from morning to night. Meat drips, fat sizzles. The smell clings to every surface: stone, cloth, hair. You know cooks who have fainted from the heat, scullery boys with blistered feet, roasting maids whose arms are scorched from grabbing pans too quickly. But it's worse for the dogs. Their wheels are mounted high, just far enough from the fire to avoid burns but close enough that their fur often singes at the ends. They pant constantly, their tongues loll, their eyes water. But they keep running, because if they stop, the meat burns unevenly. And if that happens, you're the one who gets blamed. The work of training. Turnspit dogs are not friendly. They're skittish, overworked, and sometimes mean. And who could blame them? They work long hours with no real play, fed on kitchen scraps and old bones. You train them young, pairing older dogs with pups so they learn the wheel's rhythm. The key is timing. The spit must turn slowly, steady enough for heat to cook the meat evenly, fast enough to prevent burning. You whistle, you tap the wheel, you feed at precise moments. If a dog falters, you swap him out. You keep a second wheel ready. Some houses own 4 to 6 turnspit dogs, cycling them throughout the day. The wealthier the household, the more dogs and the less cruelty. In theory, the dogs have names. You name them because you must. It's easier to train a dog that knows its name. And deep down, you want them to be more than tools, even if the kitchen staff calls them beasts or meat turners. You call them Rindle, the clever one, who runs smoothest at mid-morning. Biscuit, slow but obedient. Flask, who once broke his paw jumping from the wheel too soon. Nell, who is getting old and struggles to keep pace but still tries. You've buried 3, and no one asked their names. Not once. The social status of the dogs and you. No one respects a dog that cooks. And by extension, no one respects the one who trains them. You are neither servant nor tradesman. You are not a stable master, nor a dog handler in the hunting field. You exist in the dank, smoky limbo of the kitchen's underbelly. The cooks shout over you. The steward ignores you. The lady of the house once mistook you for a chimney boy. But when the meat is ready, perfectly browned, perfectly turned, they all nod briefly, as if it happened by magic. You never say a word, because you're used to being unseen. When things go wrong, sometimes a dog stops mid-run, collapses from exhaustion, yelps from a burned paw, or simply refuses to run. The worst are the fires: a dropped ember, a spark from the chimney, and suddenly the wheel catches flame. You lost one that way. A young pup just learning. By the time you pulled him out, the smell was unbearable. The roast was ruined. You were beaten for it. A tool or a creature. You've seen how the world sees these dogs. There's a saying in town: if you're lazy as a turnspit dog at rest, you've earned the noose. Because when the dog ages or falters, it's often killed. Some are thrown in rivers, others are simply abandoned. But not yours. You keep them until the end. You sneak them extra scraps. You rub their joints with vinegar and oil. You even let Nell sleep near the fire now, where it's warm, where she can pretend she's still part of the rhythm. And you wonder, do they know they were bred for this, that they were created to suffer? Do they dream of anything else? Do you? End of section. Reflection. In the kitchen, a new roast is placed on the spit. The steward calls for rotation. You choose Biscuit. He's steady today. He climbs in without protest. The wheel begins to turn. Slow, precise, forgotten. And you think, in a world where even dogs have a place in the machine, who's truly free? The fire never sleeps. Long after the feast ends, when the lords and ladies stumble back to their chambers, their bellies full and their fingers greasy, you're still there, raking coals, cooling wheels, feeding the dogs. The heat lingers. So does the stink. Roasted fat, burnt fur, wet stone. You've learned to live in that smell. It sticks to you just like the job. No matter how much you scrub, no matter how many times you wash in the river, it's always in your skin, beneath your nails, in your breath. Some call it the scent of labor. You know better. It's the scent of survival. A living machine. You've often thought of the spit as more than a device. It's a machine, yes, but a living one. It needs constant attention. It has moods. The fire is its heart. The meat its blood, the dog is its legs, and you. You are its mind. You judge how fast the spit should turn, how far the wheel should rotate. You time everything with instinct and repetition. You can feel when the dog is too slow, when the meat is browning too fast on one side, when the balance is just a hair off. The others don't see it. They only see what ends up on their plate. A feast for the bishop. There's a special feast tonight. A bishop is visiting, which means 2 whole pigs must be roasted. Even for a large kitchen, it's a monumental task. You're up before the crows, choosing dogs, prepping wheels, checking harnesses. You test the ropes, grease the axles, trim the dog's paws to avoid slippage. Biscuit runs first, then Rindle, then Nell only for a short turn. She's older now, her steps slow, eyes foggy, but she still wags her tail when she hears the whistle. You give her the smallest wheel, away from the main fire. Let her feel useful. That matters more than people think. Eyes in the smoke. The kitchen fills with bodies as the day goes on. Cooks chop and shout. Scullery boys scrape pots. The steward storms in and out, red-faced with worry. Spices are crushed. Wine is poured into gravy pots. Apples are stuffed into pig mouths. And through it all, the dogs keep turning. You watch their eyes through the slats of the wheel, wide, red-rimmed, focused. You whisper encouragement, tap the frame. Watch for limps, for stumbles, for hesitation. No one sees you do this. But if you do, the whole machine breaks. The fall of the wheel. In the late afternoon, it happens. A wheel collapses. One of the lesser-trained dogs on loan from another kitchen panics when a coal rolls too close to the wheel's base. He jumps. The wheel jerks. The meat tilts. The spit slips. And a half-roasted pig crashes into the ashes. Panic erupts. The steward curses. The cook shrieks. Someone blames the fireboy. But you already know the truth. The dog wasn't ready. You said so yesterday. No one listened. Now you're blamed. You're the dog keeper, the steward spits. This mess is yours. You clean it in silence. And the dog. They kill it before nightfall. Dogs and God. Later that night, when the hall echoes with hymns, and the bishop thanks the Lord for the fruits of man's labor, you sit with Rindle and Nell behind the kitchen, watching sparks rise from the chimney. Rindle licks your hand. Nell snores, dreaming. You sip from a flask of watered wine, your only reward. You wonder what God thinks of dogs made for labor. What soul could a creature have? If it was bred to run in circles for meat it will never taste. Then again, what soul do you have, if your purpose is to train them, keep them alive and walk away when they break? No one prays for the dog keeper. Not even the bishop. A brief mercy. The next morning, something strange happens. The lady of the house appears in the kitchen. She rarely enters, but today she approaches the dog wheels, looks at Biscuit, tilts her head, asks you, "Do they get days off?" You're too stunned to lie. "No, my lady." She frowns, nods slowly. Then, to your disbelief, she says, "Let them rest today." It only happens once, and the kitchen staff curses you for the delay it causes. But for that one day, you walk the wheel yourself. And for the first time in months, the dogs sleep. The butcher's side. You've learned to visit the butcher quietly. Every few weeks you trade for bones, not the good ones for stews, but the marrowless chipped ends no one wants. He saves them for you, out of pity, habit, you're not sure. The dogs know the sound of your return. They wag their tails before they even see you. You dole out bones evenly, but Nell always gets an extra. You tell yourself it's because she's older, but really, it's because you fear she won't be there next week. You've buried too many this year. And winter is coming. The turn of the seasons. As frost appears on the kitchen stones, the wheels creak louder. Wood contracts. Ropes fray more easily. Fires must burn hotter, which means the dogs must run harder. You spend more time checking paws, replacing slats, rubbing their legs with cloth soaked in vinegar and soot. The cook complains that Biscuit is too slow. You nod but don't respond. You know Biscuit ran 13 hours last week. You know Biscuit is dying. But no one counts time in dogs. Only in meals served. End of section. Reflection. You wipe sweat from your brow as the last pheasant comes off the spit. Outside, laughter rises from the great hall. A harp plucks a slow, delicate tune. Glasses clink. Spoons scrape trenchers clean. Inside the kitchen, your dogs sleep in a circle, bellies full of scraps. You sit beside them, back against the hearth. And you wonder, if no one hears the wheel turn, did it still make the meal? One of the dogs didn't get up this morning. Nell. She didn't whine, didn't yelp, just stayed curled under the bench where she always slept, head resting on the bit of cloth you gave her last winter. You knew before you touched her, before you called her name softly. She was cold, still, and lighter, somehow like something had already lifted from her. You don't cry. You don't have time. There's a boar to roast before dusk. The fire keeps burning. The new pup ladle is strong but stubborn, keeps trying to jump from the wheel. You've adjusted the harness, changed the pace, even smeared a bit of gravy near the slats to lure him forward. It helps for now, but it reminds you every dog must be coaxed into obedience, into becoming a wheel runner. It isn't natural. You wonder how many ever truly accepted it. Not just the dogs, but the people too. A changing world. There are rumors. From travelers, from merchants, from passing friars. Whispers that some kitchens, especially in cities, are replacing turnspit dogs with clockwork machines or steam-powered cranks. They call them roasting jacks. No sweat, no barking, just a ticking sound and a slow, even turn. No feeding required. No training. No heartbreak. You pretend not to care. But you do. The question of worth. The steward scolded you today for feeding the dogs scraps from the guest table. They're just animals, he hissed. Tools. You don't fatten the bellows, do you? You said nothing. You're good at that. But later, as the spit turned and the goose browned, you fed Biscuit the skin from your own plate. He licked your hand and wagged, as if to say, I saw that. And for a moment, you felt more human than you had in weeks. Burial by ash. You buried Nell under the willow by the edge of the orchard. You marked the spot with a simple stone carved with her name, not a proper carving, just a scratch of letters. You brought Ash and Biscuit with you. They sniffed, sat quietly. Morrow didn't come. She's too young to understand. You lit a small fire, just enough to warm your hands. And you told her story aloud, though no one asked for it. She turned the spit on Christmas. She learned to jump from the wheel without stumbling. She never bit anyone, not once. She ran clean. The smoke drifted up through the branches. No one interrupted. A keeper's memory. You remember them all. Not just Nell, but all the dogs before. The first one you trained. The one who bit the steward's son and vanished the next day. The one who ran even after breaking a toe. The litter you tried to save during the frost. Only one survived. You never named that one. Maybe because you knew better by then. Or maybe because the job was starting to name you. A small act of rebellion. That evening, you do something dangerous. You skip a rotation. Just once. You let the spit sit still for 5 minutes while you watered the dogs. You told the cook you were fixing the harness. He believed you barely. The meat came out a little uneven. No one noticed. Except you. And the dogs. You wonder if this is what rebellion feels like. Not fire, not swords. Just 5 quiet minutes of kindness. The dog and the boy. A new kitchen boy has taken interest in Morrow. He sneaks her extra bits of bread when he thinks no one is watching. He pets her behind the ears, talks to her like she's a friend. You could warn him not to get attached. But you don't. You remember what it was like when you were the one whispering into the straw, when you believed you could save them all, before the wheel became your religion. Maybe he'll do better. Maybe he'll be the one who stops the wheel altogether. The silence of the spit. The fire crackles, the wheel creaks, the gears groan. And then for a moment it all stops. You pause, breath held. The spit sits still, the room goes quiet. You imagine a world where no dog runs in circles for a roast, where kitchens hum with gentle music instead of barking, where animals are companions, not cogs, where you are something more than a nameless shadow behind the feast. And then the cook yells. The moment is gone. You whistle, Morrow climbs into the wheel. And the spit begins to turn again. Final reflection, turning into dust. You are not in the histories. No tapestry will show the dogs who ran in circles for someone else's meal. No records will list the man who trained them, who buried them, who loved them like children but treated them like machines. But the meals were served. The nobles ate. The guests praised the roast, said it was perfectly turned. And somewhere behind it all, there was a small, tireless dog. And someone like you. Both forgotten, but never truly gone. Because history is not made by those who sit at the table. It is made by those who keep the fire burning. Story 8. Digging up the dead for medical science. It's well past midnight, and the fog is thick as milk. The town sleeps, windows dark, chimneys cold. Not even the watchman stirs. You are silent, shovel in hand, boots sunk ankle deep in mud. The cemetery gate creaks behind you, but no one hears it. Because no one wants to know what you're doing. And that's what keeps you safe. You are a resurrectionist, a grave robber by necessity, by trade, and by grotesque demand. You do not dig for gold. You do not desecrate for pleasure. You do it for medicine, for science, for men in powdered wigs who speak of anatomy and enlightenment so they can dissect what you've stolen, beneath lanterns and locked doors. The body trade. The year is 1823, and in cities like Edinburgh, London, and Dublin, medical schools are booming. Knowledge is expanding. Surgeons want to understand the human body with a precision no textbook can offer. But cadavers are hard to come by. The law only allows the dissection of executed criminals, and there are fewer executions now. Enlightenment thinkers have made even the noose scarce, but the students keep enrolling. The professors keep lecturing. And so they need bodies. Fresh ones. Yours to provide for a fee. How the work begins. You're not alone. You work in a team, 3 men in total. One keeps watch. One digs, one extracts. The trick is speed. Too slow and you'll be caught. Too sloppy and the corpse will be useless. The professors want intact cadavers, preferably within 72 hours of death. So you learn the obituaries. You bribe gravediggers. You study funerals. You watch the mourners. You even help bury the coffin only to return that same night, lantern shuttered, tools wrapped in cloth. And dig them back up. The tools of the trade. You don't use a full shovel, it's too noisy. You use a short-handled spade designed to cut deep and scoop clean. For clay soil, a crowbar helps loosen the packed earth. For fresh graves, the digging is easier. The dirt hasn't settled yet. You can often reach the coffin in under an hour. Then comes the hard part. You break the coffin at the head just enough to pull the body out by the arms or shoulders. You leave the clothes and jewelry. They bring trouble. The doctors don't want the clothes. Just the corpse. The smell of fresh earth. There's a moment just before the coffin breaks when the air changes. It smells like rotting flowers and wet silk, the smell of death freshly laid. It clings to your fingers, your coat, your breath. You don't flinch anymore. You can't afford to. You pull the body free, sling it in the sack and go. If you're lucky, it takes under 2 hours. If the ground is dry, if no one is watching, if the dogs aren't out, even less. But you are never relaxed. You are always listening. Because one sound, one shout is all it takes to end everything. The anatomy man. You never meet the surgeons. You deal with the middleman, the anatomy man. He takes the bodies, counts out the coins, and gives you the name of the next school in need. Sometimes he says, "This one must be a woman," or "They want someone with strong bones." The students don't ask where the bodies come from. They don't want to know. Some say a prayer before the first cut. Others whistle as they peel away the skin. But once the cadaver is on the table, it stops being a person. It becomes science. The cost of mistakes. Not every job goes smoothly. One night you pulled up the wrong grave. A child buried months ago, too far gone. The middleman refused it. You had to bury it again in a field nearby in silence. Another time, you were chased by dogs. One caught your boot and tore straight through the leather. You limped for a week. But the worst mistake is when the townsfolk suspect. If a family returns to a grave and finds it disturbed, earth sunken, marker askew, they tell the constable. The police search the area. The school denies everything. The body disappears. And you disappear with it. If you're lucky. Graveyard justice. You've seen what happens when a resurrectionist is caught. Once in Manchester, they hanged one, not for stealing but for disturbing the dead. Another time, a mob dragged a digger through the streets, pelting him with coal and offal, broke both his arms, left him on the steps of the church. The irony, you think, is that many of those same people have benefited from the science these bodies provided. Their bones set properly, their tumors removed, their wounds stitched with techniques learned on cadavers you delivered. They despise you, but they profit from you, and they'll never admit it. A personal rule. You've made one promise to yourself. Never dig someone you knew. You've had to turn down jobs because of that. A cousin, a friend of your mother, the wife of a shopkeeper who once gave you a coat in the rain. Even the anatomy man understood. "You're not paid to have feelings," he once said. You didn't respond, because you know that's not true. You're not paid to have a name, or a title, or a history. You're just paid to deliver the dead. End of section. Reflection. The sack is heavy on your shoulders as you climb the slope outside the cemetery. Behind you, the grave lies open, half filled, the coffin splintered, the marker crooked. No one will notice, at least not tonight. You whisper a quick apology as always. Not because you believe they can hear you, but because you need someone to hear you. Even if it's just the dirt. Even if it's just the dark. You wonder, when you die, will anyone leave you in the ground? You'd think it gets easier. With time, repetition, and coin in hand, most trades become routine, muscle memory, habit. But resurrection work, it never becomes simple. The weight doesn't change. Not just the literal dead weight of the bodies you haul through the mud and streets, but the weight of eyes, the imagined stares from behind black-curtained windows, the gaze of headstones, the thought that each set of bones once told stories, had voices, names, prayers whispered over them. And still you dig. Because there's profit in death. And not just yours. An economy of the unrested. In Edinburgh, the going rate for a fresh male specimen is nearly £10, a small fortune. A woman fetches slightly less. Children, strangely, are worth more. Rare, valuable to certain studies. It's all part of the ledger now. Male under 3 days, 10 pounds. Female adult, 7 pounds. Child under 10, 12 pounds. Limbs only, 2 pounds to 4 pounds each. Skulls cleaned, 5 pounds. You don't write this down, but you remember every figure. Because you're not just a gravedigger anymore. You're a supplier in a growing market. And the dead are your inventory. The surgeon's circle. Eventually, you're invited quietly to observe a dissection. Not by request, but as a sort of grim courtesy. The surgeon, a wiry man with eyes like needles, greets you at the back door of the anatomy theater. "You've delivered half my term's teaching," he says, not unkindly. Inside, students gather around the marble table. They chatter, laugh nervously, sketch quickly. The smell is sharp spirits, soap, and rot. You see the corpse on the slab, a man no older than you, jaw slack, arms splayed, flesh gray. Your work. They begin with the chest cavity. You don't look away, because you want to understand what it was all for. The science of silence. The surgeon speaks as he cuts. The diaphragm here, notice how thin, could explain shallow breath. He lifts the heart. Hardened congestion, possibly led to failure. The students nod, sketch, ask questions. No one asks the man's name. You do quietly. Was he from White-Capelle? The surgeon glances at you. You knew him. No, you lie, just wondered. He doesn't answer, he doesn't need to. In this room, the dead are lessons, not people. Bodies in transit. There are worse parts of the job than digging. Transport, for instance. You've hauled bodies in hay carts, laundry baskets, sealed barrels, and once in a coffin built with a false bottom. It's not just about hiding the corpse. It's about hiding yourself. Police now patrol cemeteries. Churches post guards. And townsfolk take to watching their loved ones' graves in shifts, holding lanterns all night long. They call them watchmen, but really they're sentinels of sorrow. You've had to wait days for one to blink. And when they do, you're in and out before they exhale. You don't feel clever about it. You feel cold. The case of the iron coffin. One night, the anatomy man gives you a challenge. Family buried their daughter in an iron coffin. Rich folk said she was a miracle child. We need her. You hesitate. Iron coffins are rare and hellish to break into, but the pay is double. You go. The cemetery is old, the kind where trees grow through the headstones and owls scream instead of hoot. The soil is loose, at least, but the coffin is deep. When you reach it, you curse. Solid iron, riveted shut, sealed like a vault. It takes 3 hours to breach it. When you open the lid, you find her dressed in lace, clutching a rosary. She looks like she's sleeping. You close the lid. You don't take her. Even the anatomy man doesn't argue. Some dead you leave buried. The burgeoning fear. Lately, things have changed. You hear whispers of body snatchers being murdered on the job set upon by grieving families, or thugs paid by churches. One man was supposedly buried alive, nailed inside the coffin he tried to rob. A warning. Another had his hands removed and left hanging from a chapel door. There are rumors of fake burials, where families inter rocks and pigs' blood just to catch men like you. The dead, it seems, now have defenders. And you only have the night. A visit too close. A week ago, you walked past a cemetery in broad daylight. You shouldn't have. A boy shouted your name. A woman spat. They didn't say anything else, but their eyes followed you down the road, around the bend, into your bones. You keep your head low now. You sleep in different places each week. Sometimes you think of stopping, but you don't know how else to live. And no one else will pay for what you know how to do. End of section. Reflection. In the anatomy theater, a new corpse is brought in, head covered, feet tagged. The students crowd in, their voices low with curiosity. You stand in the back, unnoticed, listening. And you wonder if these bodies teach the doctors how to save lives. Who taught them how to forget the lives already lost? The last body you delivered was a mistake. Not in its condition. She was fresh, cold, intact. Not in the location. You lifted her from a quiet churchyard outside of town, where the fog drowned sound, and the gravedigger was known to drink himself into sleep. No, the mistake was her name. You didn't recognize it at first, but when the anatomy man unwrapped the sheet and tossed her hair back from her face, your knees nearly buckled. Marjorie Lunn. She had shared your fire one winter, years ago, when your ribs showed through your shirt and your boots were full of holes. She had given you bread, and you had delivered her body for 10 pounds. The cost of coin. You left without saying a word. The anatomy man didn't ask questions. He never does. But you didn't sleep that night. You walked the streets, torchlight flickering behind shutters, church bells long silent. In your pocket, the silver clinked softly. 30 pieces would have been easier. At least those came with a name and a noose. A changing wind. It's 1828 now. Something is shifting. In London and Edinburgh, trials are being held. People whisper of Burke and Hare, not mere resurrectionists, but murderers, killing the poor and selling them fresh to anatomy schools. The line between death's scavenger and death's cause is growing thin. You've never killed. But how long until someone assumes you have? How long until someone asks you to? And how long until you agree, if the money is right? You don't like the answer that forms in your mind. The Anatomy Act whispers of change. There are rumors in Parliament of a bill, the Anatomy Act, that will legalize the use of unclaimed bodies from workhouses and hospitals for dissection. No more need for resurrectionists. No more illegal digging. No more middlemen. No more you. But nothing passes fast in Westminster. For now, the schools still need you. Still press coins into your palm with barely a nod. Still slice open the chests of the unwanted and sketch what they find inside. Science marches on. Over bones you laid before it. An empty grave. You go back one night. To Marjorie's grave. You fill it. Quietly, carefully. You even place a handful of her favorite wildflowers, blue starworts, on top of the fresh soil. A gesture of apology, of memory, of cowardice perhaps. Because you never said no. You just walked away. When the job finds you, a new man joined your circle recently. Too young, too eager. He laughs too loud in the pub and brags about his first dig. He boasts of how little the dead mean to him. He doesn't last. A week later, someone finds him floating in the river, his mouth full of dirt, his fingers broken. A warning. To you, to the profession. Does it matter? You wrap your tools in oilcloth and tuck them deeper beneath the floorboards, just in case. The ground is shifting. And perhaps it's time you buried the job before it buries you. Fade to obscurity. You stop visiting the anatomy schools. You take fewer jobs, move further out, avoid names you recognize, refuse any request that feels rushed, desperate, or touched by cruelty. Eventually, they stop asking. A year passes, then another. The Anatomy Act is signed in 1832. The trade dries up almost overnight. Dissection becomes legal under the Crown's eye. Hospitals send their dead to the surgeons in carts, with no whispers, no mud, no need for the likes of you. And just like that, you are obsolete. The dead keep coming. You still dream of them. Not the ones you took, but the ones you didn't. The ones who stared as you passed. The ones whose graves you left untouched. The ones whose names are carved in your memory, like the soft curve of bone beneath skin. They visit you in silence, not angry, just present, just waiting. Final reflection, the dirt above you. You are not remembered. No statue bears your name. No medical school hangs your portrait. You are not cited in journals nor thanked in lectures. You are the quiet bridge between ignorance and knowledge, laid down in the dark. You turned death into tuition. You made medicine out of grief. And when your time came, when you lay still beneath the same kind of soil you once disturbed, no one came to lift you from it. You were finally left alone. And maybe that was all you ever wanted.